The world during the time of Pangia was a place with extreme conditions and noticeable environmental contrasts. The planet's land existed as one large supercontinent surrounded by a single ocean. All the continents known today were joined together, forming a continuous landmass that extended from very hot regions near the equator to very cold regions near the poles. Life developed and survived under difficult conditions that included strong storms, areas with harmful gases, and long periods of dryness. Many unusual animals lived on this supercontinent, including early reptiles that moved across dry, cracked ground, and large predators that lived in regions affected by volcanic ash. Earth during the Pangia era was in an active state of geological change, and every form of life had to cope with demanding environmental challenges to survive. Before we delve into what Earth was like during the Pangia era, subscribe to our channel and let us know in the comments below where in the world you're watching from. We're always eager to hear where our viewers are tuning in from. More than 300 million years ago, the Earth looked completely different from the world we know today. All of its continents, which are now scattered across the globe, were once joined together in a single huge landmass known as Pangia. This supercontinent was not created overnight, but through an extremely slow process that stretched across hundreds of millions of years. Scientists call this process continental drift, an idea first suggested in the early 20th century by a German scientist named Alfred Wegener. His bold idea suggested that the Earth's land masses had once been united, only to be pushed apart by the constant movement of the planet's crust. The Earth's crust is not one solid piece. Instead, it is broken into giant slabs called tectonic plates, which float on top of the soft, semi-liquid layer of hot rock beneath, known as the mantle. Over very long periods of time, these plates slide, crash, and pull apart, all thanks to the slow movement of heat deep within the Earth, what scientists call convection currents. These hidden movements are the force behind mountain building, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and finally, the shifting of whole continents. During the late Paleozoic era, roughly 300 million years ago, the slowly moving continents began to crash into one another. This was not a gentle joining, but a world-shaking event marked by the rise of enormous mountain chains and the closing of ancient seas. Piece by piece, the continents locked together until they formed the supercontinent Pangia. The last part of this joining came when two huge land masses, Gondwana, which included what is now Africa, South America, India, Australia and Antarctica, and Laurasia, which included North America, Europe and Asia, smashed together. At its height, Pangia was truly the main piece of the planet. It sat like a giant puzzle piece surrounded by a huge global ocean called Panthalassa. This ocean stretched almost endlessly, covering most of the Earth's surface, while Pangia itself was bordered by smaller seas. The joining of so much land created new environments, where plants and animals could spread more easily, but it also brought great geological unrest. Pressure built up where the plates pressed against one another, causing many volcanic eruptions and earthquakes that shook the supercontinent. Yet, just as the same forces of plate movements created Pangia, they also ensured that it would not last forever. About 200 million years ago, during the Mesozoic era, Pangia began to break apart. Cracks opened in its crust as melted rock pushed upward, tearing the supercontinent into pieces. Over tens of millions of years, those pieces drifted into the positions where we now find the continents today. This dramatic breakup not only reshaped the face of the Earth, but also changed life itself. New coastlines, climates, and habitats appeared, giving plants and animals new chances to adjust, spread, and evolve. The science of plate tectonics helps explain in detail how Pangia came together and later broke apart. Tectonic plates interact in different ways. At convergent boundaries, where plates push against each other, the crust crumples and folds, giving rise to mountain ranges such as the modern Andes. At divergent boundaries, where plates pull apart, melted rock rises to fill the gap, creating new crust along features like the mid-ocean ridges. Another important process is subduction, where one plate sinks beneath another. Subduction zones not only fuel volcanoes, but also close off seas and lift new mountain ranges, shaping the land even more. Pangia's existence is more than just an idea. It is supported by strong evidence from many different sciences. Geology shows that mountain ranges and rock layers on opposite sides of oceans often match up perfectly, as though they were once joined. For instance, the Appalachian Mountains of North America line up clearly with the Caledonian Mountains of Scotland, suggesting they were once part of the same chain before the Atlantic Ocean split them apart. Fossil records also tell the story. The freshwater reptile Mesosaurus, for example, left its remains in both South America and Africa. It would have been impossible for this small creature to swim across an ocean, meaning the two continents must once have been connected. Even paleoclimate evidence adds strength to the case. Coal beds, which only form in warm, swampy environments, are found in regions like North America and Europe that today lie in much cooler climates. This means those areas must once have been much closer to the equator. On the other hand, traces of ancient glaciers are found in tropical regions such as India and Africa, showing that those lands once sat near the poles. All of this points toward a time when the continents were brought together in a very different arrangement than today. The breakup of Pangia was not the end of the story, but just another chapter in Earth's ongoing cycle of creation and destruction. The continents are still moving today, slowly but surely. Mountains rise, oceans grow wider, and islands form, all under the influence of the same forces that once built Pangia. Even now, the Earth is busy shaping its future landscapes. To understand how tectonic plate movements led to the making of the giant landmass Pangia, we first need to understand the nature of the Earth's outer shell. The Earth's hard outer layer, which is made of the crust and the top part of the mantle, is split into big pieces known as tectonic plates. These plates float and move on the soft, partly melted layer beneath them, acting much like rafts on a huge ocean. Around 300 million years ago, during the late Paleozoic era, these tectonic plates were not in the places we see them today. Instead, they were slowly moving toward each other. This movement was driven by a process called mantle convection. Hot material from deep inside the Earth rises to the surface, cools down, and then sinks back, making a circular motion. This movement pushes and pulls on the tectonic plates, causing them to crash together, pull apart, or slide against one another. As these plates interacted, they started to come together, pushing pieces of land closer. Over millions of years, different parts of land that had once been separated by oceans and other barriers slowly touched and joined. The crashing of plates not only stitched the land together, but also caused great changes on the Earth's surface. Mountain chains, like the Appalachian Mountains and the Himalayas, were formed through these powerful plate crashes, shaping the Earth's surface even more. By the time Pangia was fully formed, it held almost all of the Earth's land in one huge stretch. This joining created a special environment with many kinds of climates. As Pangia later began to split apart, around 200 million years ago, it started to form the continents we know today. The results of these plate movements shaped the face of our planet and changed both the natural world and the land itself, showing how powerful and ever-changing Earth's processes are over time. The making of Pangia, the ancient giant landmass that once joined much of Earth's lands, covers a very long timeline. Scientists suggest that Pangia began to form during the late Paleozoic era, about 300 million years ago. This time marked the last stage of bringing many lands together through tectonic plate movements, creating one great land area surrounded by a single ocean called Panthalassa. Most of Pangia stayed together during much of the late Paleozoic and into the early Mesozoic era. About 200 million years ago, during the Triassic period, it reached its greatest size. Scientists believe that the shape of Pangia had powerful effects on Earth's weather, ocean flows, and the spread of plants and animals. The wide centre of the landmass likely faced extreme weather, forcing living things to make big changes to survive. However, Pangia did not last forever. Around 180 million years ago, during the Jurassic period, it began to break apart. This breaking was caused by the movements of tectonic plates beneath the Earth's surface. The once great landmass slowly drifted into the separate continents we know today, such as Africa, South America, and North America. The story of Pangia is not just an interesting part of Earth's history, it also gives us important clues about how continents move and how plates work. Modern science still studies the events that shaped our planet, showing how ancient changes are still visible in today's land and nature. By studying Pangia, we gain a deeper respect for the powerful processes that continue to shape our world. The forming of Pangia, which happened around 300 million years ago, changed Earth's surface in powerful ways. Before Pangia existed, the continents were spread apart, creating a more broken pattern of land. The joining of these lands into one giant mass not only changed the balance of land and water, but also affected weather, ocean flows, and the growth of life on Earth. As Pangia formed, the crashing of tectonic plates caused major changes. Huge mountain chains, such as the Appalachians and the Urals, rose from this movement, showing the great strength of these forces. The joining of lands also created large inland seas and changed coastlines, making new natural zones. These new areas provided homes for many kinds of life, giving rise to great variety and new types of plants and animals. But Pangia did not stay together. It began to break apart about 200 million years ago, leading to the making of today's continents. This splitting and drifting changed natural systems and helped shape the land we see now. The pulling apart also let melted rock rise and form new oceans, changing the Earth's shape even more. As tectonic plates shifted, they redrew coastlines and caused volcanoes and earthquakes, adding more changes to Earth's surface. Even today, the results of Pangia can still be seen in Earth's features. The lines of mountain ranges, the spread of earthquakes, and even the way fossils of plants and animals are found on faraway continents show the lasting effects of this ancient landmass. Learning about Pangia and what happened after helps us understand not only Earth's past, but also the forces still shaping it today. The forming of Pangia, the giant landmass that existed during the late Paleozoic and early Mesozoic eras, was a huge event in Earth's history, tied to the movement of plates. The main tectonic plates in this process included the North American plate, South American plate, Eurasian plate, African plate, Indian plate, Australian plate, and the Antarctic plate. Each plate played an important part as they slowly moved and crashed together over millions of years. Around 300 million years ago, these plates began to come together in a complicated movement, driven by the strong forces beneath Earth's crust. The North American plate moved southward, while the Eurasian plate also drifted south. At the same time, the African plate, which was closely joined with the South American plate, started to push against these northern plates, forming the great landmass that became Pangia. This great movement changed Earth's shape and weather in important ways. One of the most important forces behind the birth of Pangia was the presence of subduction zones. These were places where one massive slab of the Earth's crust, known as a tectonic plate, was pushed beneath another. When this happened, the ground did not stay still. Instead, it crumpled, folded, and buckled, creating whole mountain chains. The mighty Appalachian Mountains in North America and the tall Ural Mountains in Eurasia rose out of such huge crashes. These subduction zones also brought fire to the surface of the Earth as melted rock pushed upward, causing volcanic eruptions that filled the prehistoric skies with ash and changed the landscape forever. The slow grinding and crashing of the Earth's huge plates could be compared to a deep, steady rhythm that never stopped. Each time these massive slabs of rock pushed against one another, the land rose or sank. Great mountains were lifted higher, wide valleys became deeper, and volcanoes spilled out fresh layers of rock that slowly built new ground. Even in our time, long after the giant landmass of Pangia split into separate continents, scientists still study these old marks and shapes in the Earth's crust. These ancient features remind us that the planet has always been full of movement and power, never still and never truly calm. But the tale of Pangia did not end when it first came together. After many tens of millions of years, the same powerful forces beneath the surface that joined its parts slowly began to tear them apart. A supercontinent that had once been one single body of land started to crack and drift in several different directions. This very slow separation eventually formed the continents we know today: Africa, North America, South America, Europe, Asia, Australia, and Antarctica. The breakup of Pangia did far more than change the map of the world. By moving the continents apart, it separated plants and animals with huge stretches of ocean, and this isolation pushed life down new paths, helping unique species evolve in different places. If you imagine the Earth more than 300 million years ago, you would not see scattered continents divided by seas and oceans. Instead, you would see one enormous landmass stretching almost from the cold area near the North Pole to the icy lands near the South Pole. This giant supercontinent was Pangia, a place where deserts, swampy lowlands, tropical forests and tall mountain chains existed side by side. Its size and connected shape had a powerful effect on the climate, the soil, the wind patterns, and the environments that plants and animals depended on. The coastline of Pangia was very different from the coastlines we see today. Instead of several separate continents with broken edges shaped by many oceans, Pangia had long, sweeping shores that wrapped around its huge body like a single unbroken curve. The coastline of Pangia was very different from the coastlines we see today. Instead of several separate continents with broken edges shaped by many oceans, Pangia had long, sweeping shores that wrapped around its huge body like a single unbroken curve. Where today we see little islands, peninsulas, and narrow bays, back then there were towering cliffs facing the sea, endless stretches of dry desert meeting the waves, and swampy regions alive with plants and creatures right next to warm, thick forests. As the supercontinent split and drifted apart, these once smooth coastlines changed dramatically, becoming uneven and complex. Over many millions of years, the shifting pieces formed the familiar shapes of continents and oceans that we can point out on a globe today. The climate across Pangia was just as intense and full of variety. Near the edges of the supercontinent, close to the oceans, the air was warm, moist, and able to support rich plant and animal life. Dense forests spread across great distances, providing food and shelter for many species. But the center of Pangia painted a very different picture. Far from the cooling influence of the ocean, the middle regions turned into extremely dry and harsh deserts. Some of these deserts spread farther than the human eye could ever see, reaching sizes that were even larger than the modern Sahara Desert. This sharp difference between the green, humid coastlines and the hot, empty interior encouraged the rise of many different types of life, each adapting in its own way to survive in these very different surroundings. Across tens upon tens of millions of years, the giant plates beneath the surface kept moving, and the supercontinent continued to tear apart piece by piece. The Atlantic Ocean began to open like a widening crack in the Earth's crust, separating lands that had once been firmly attached. As this ocean widened, coastlines shifted, climates changed, and many ecosystems were transformed. New chances for life appeared as animals and plants found new environments or became isolated from others. This constant cycle of forming land, breaking it apart and rebuilding it in new shapes is the great process that slowly shaped the world we live in today. One of the most impressive results of Pangia's existence was the birth of huge mountain ranges. The ancient Appalachian Mountains, which now appear worn down and rounded after millions of years of wind and rain, actually rose during the time of Pangia. Long ago, their peaks were sharp and extremely tall, pushed upward by the unbelievable pressure of massive plates colliding. Far across the ocean, the Caledonian Mountains in what is now Scotland and Scandinavia formed in the same way. These mountains stand as reminders that these distant regions were once connected as part of the same land. Their presence today is like a stony memory of a time when the Earth's surface was being pushed, folded, and reshaped again and again. Pangia also created massive deserts because of its size. Without oceans nearby to bring moisture and rainfall, the center of the supercontinent dried into a huge expanse of sand, stone, and bare land. While the middle dried out, the coastal areas remained full of life. Thick layers of plants grew in swampy regions along the shores, building up over long stretches of time. As these plants died and were buried under mud and pressure, they slowly turned into giant deposits of coal. This coal is still mined by people today, and every piece is a quiet record of ancient forests that once flourished and then sank into the earth hundreds of millions of years ago. Eventually, after about 150 million years had passed, the breakup of Pangia became rapid and clear. The huge pieces of land continued to drift away from one another, and as they later collided in new places, they created fresh mountain ranges. The Rocky Mountains of North America formed because of these new collisions, as did the tall Andes Mountains in South America and the mighty Himalayas in Asia, whose peaks include the highest points on Earth. Each of these mountain ranges is part of the long, ongoing story that began during the age of Pangia, the story of a planet that never stops shifting and rearranging itself. In modern times, geologists use many clever tools and methods to uncover this deep history. They study rocks by matching layers and types from different continents, just like fitting together pieces of an old puzzle. By examining fossils, they find proof that certain animals once lived on lands that were connected. For example, the small freshwater reptile called Mesosaurus has been discovered in both South America and Africa. A creature like this could never have crossed a wide ocean. so its fossils show that these continents were once joined side by side. Scientists also use radiometric dating, a precise method that measures the age of rocks by observing natural radioactive changes. This allows them to build a timeline that stretches back hundreds of millions of years. In the last several decades, new technology has added even more detail to the story. With the help of powerful computers, scientists can now simulate how tectonic plates have moved over enormous periods of time. These digital models show the continents drifting, colliding, and reshaping the planet's face just as they did in the distant past. By watching these carefully made simulations, researchers can bring the ancient world to life and gain a deeper understanding of how our planet has always been changing and will always continue to change. The supercontinent known as Pangia was an immense landmass that existed hundreds of millions of years ago, uniting nearly all the land on Earth into a single, colossal continent. It was a world of extremes, stretching from polar regions to tropical zones, and its existence had a profound effect on the climate, the oceans, and all forms of life that had managed to thrive on the planet. But this vast, unified landmass was not meant to last forever. Over time, Pangia began to fracture, a process driven by forces deep within the Earth, reshaping the planet's surface and forever altering the course of life. Understanding why Pangia broke apart and how its breakup influenced life requires looking at the slow but unstoppable movements of the Earth's crust, the violent power of volcanoes, the shifting patterns of the oceans, and the challenges and opportunities these changes created for plants, animals, and early humans alike. At the heart of Pangia's breakup was the movement of the Earth's tectonic plates. The Earth's outer layer is not a single solid shell, but is made up of enormous, rigid plates that float atop a softer, slowly moving layer of molten rock known as the mantle. These plates are constantly moving, although so slowly that the changes are almost imperceptible over a human lifetime. Yet, over millions of years, these movements have enormous consequences. The forces generated by the mantle beneath the plates create stresses that push, pull, and twist the continental crust. For Pangia, these forces began to act unevenly across the supercontinent. The immense size of Pangia meant that different regions experienced different pressures. In some areas, the crust was being pulled apart. In others, it was being pushed together. These stresses eventually caused massive cracks, or rifts, to form in the Earth's crust. A rift is essentially a place where the land begins to stretch and thin, often accompanied by volcanic activity as magma rises from below to fill the gaps. The first major rifts in Pangia appeared roughly around 220 million years ago, during the late Triassic period, starting a slow but unstoppable process that would continue for tens of millions of years. As these rifts widened, the supercontinent began to break into smaller pieces. The northern section, known as Laurasia, and the southern section, called Gondwana, gradually drifted apart. The opening of the Atlantic Ocean was one of the most dramatic results of this movement. In the area that would become the eastern coast of what is now North America and the western coast of what is now Europe and Africa, molten rock from the mantle pushed up through the rifts, creating new crust and slowly separating these lands. The first signs of this ocean beginning to form appeared roughly around 190 million years ago during the early Jurassic period. As the plates continued to move, the gap widened, eventually becoming the vast Atlantic Ocean we know today. This new ocean was not just empty space. It was filled with water that affected climate patterns, ocean currents, and the migration routes of countless species of plants and animals. The breakup of Pangia did not happen quietly. The rifting and volcanic activity released enormous amounts of gases into the atmosphere, including carbon dioxide and sulfur dioxide, which had significant effects on global climate. Carbon dioxide, a greenhouse gas, trapped heat in the atmosphere, warming the planet and causing shifts in rainfall patterns. Sulfur dioxide could combine with water to create acid rain, affecting both land and water ecosystems. These changes in climate forced plants and animals to adapt rapidly or face extinction. Forests that once stretched uninterrupted across Pangia became fragmented, and the deserts expanded in regions where the land was being stretched and thinned. Animals that had previously roamed vast continuous areas suddenly found themselves isolated on smaller land masses. This isolation became a key driver of evolution, as species adapted to new environments in ways that led to the emergence of entirely new groups of plants and animals. The oceans, which were drastically reshaped by the breakup of Pangia, played a crucial role in the distribution of life. The separation of land masses allowed new seaways to form, changing the flow of ocean currents and the mixing of warm and cold water. These changes in ocean circulation influenced climate patterns on land, creating regions of intense rainfall in some areas and prolonged drought in others. Marine life was profoundly affected as well. Shallow seas that had once covered parts of the continental shelf began to recede, while new ocean basins provided habitats for fish, mollusks, and other marine creatures. Coral reefs, which are highly sensitive to temperature and water chemistry, had to adjust to these changes, migrating to areas where conditions remained favourable. Some species thrived in these new habitats, while others disappeared entirely, leaving behind fossils that would tell the story of these transformations millions of years later. Volcanic activity along the rift zones of the breaking continents also contributed to the reshaping of the Earth. Lava flows added new rock to the surface, creating mountain ranges and volcanic plateaus that disrupted existing ecosystems. Volcanic eruptions could be catastrophic on a local scale, covering forests with ash, releasing poisonous gases, and causing sudden extinctions of species unable to escape the affected areas. However, over longer periods, volcanic activity also created fertile soils, which encouraged the growth of new plant life and provided resources for herbivorous animals. This cycle of destruction and renewal played a vital role in shaping the evolutionary path of many species. The fragmentation of Pangia also had a profound effect on freshwater systems. Rivers, lakes, and inland seas that once flowed uninterrupted across vast regions became divided as the land split apart. This fragmentation influenced the migration and evolution of freshwater species such as amphibians, early reptiles, and fish. Populations that had once been connected were now isolated in separate river systems or lakes, leading to the development of unique adaptations and new species. Some fish species, for example, became specialized to survive in stagnant or low-oxygen waters, while others developed behaviors to cope with seasonal droughts. The breakup of rivers and lakes created opportunities for evolution on a scale that would not have been possible on a single, continuous landmass like Pangia. Plant life was also deeply affected by the breakup. Large forests and swamps that had dominated the supercontinent were divided into smaller, isolated patches. These pockets of vegetation became evolutionary laboratories, where plants adapted to new soils, climates, and interactions with animals. Some plant species developed tougher leaves to survive in drier conditions, while others evolved new strategies for reproduction, such as producing seeds that could be carried long distances by wind or animals. As continents drifted apart, different climates emerged, from humid tropical regions to arid deserts, and plants had to respond to these varied conditions. The fragmentation of habitats encouraged diversity, and new plant lineages began to appear that would shape the ecosystems of the future. Animal life, particularly terrestrial vertebrates, experienced similar pressures. Large reptiles and early mammals that had once roamed freely across Pangia now found themselves confined to smaller territories. This isolation led to speciation, where populations of the same species diverged over time into distinct new species. Dinosaurs, for example, evolved in unique ways on different landmasses, leading to the incredible variety of species observed in the fossil record. Smaller creatures such as insects, amphibians, and early mammals also adapted to these new environments, exploiting niches that had been unavailable on the larger supercontinent. Some species developed specialized diets, while others evolved new defensive strategies against predators, demonstrating the creative power of natural selection in response to changing geography. The breakup of Pangia also had a direct influence on climate over millions of years. The rearrangement of continents altered wind patterns and ocean currents, which in turn affected temperature and rainfall. Regions that had previously experienced moderate climates could become extremely dry or wet, depending on their position relative to the newly formed oceans. Mountain ranges created by volcanic and tectonic activity influenced the flow of air masses, creating rain shadows in some areas and heavy precipitation in others. These changes in climate forced both plants and animals to adjust, migrate, or face extinction. Ice ages, periods of intense cold and glaciation, were influenced in part by the configuration of continents, as the placement of land masses near the poles affected the buildup of ice sheets and the distribution of heat around the planet. sea levels also changed dramatically as Pangia broke apart. When large areas of the continental crust sank or were flooded by rising oceans, shallow seas formed over regions that had once been dry land. These shallow seas created habitats for a wide variety of marine organisms and facilitated the spread of marine life across previously unconnected regions. In contrast, areas that were uplifted became dry land, providing new territories for terrestrial species to colonize. This constant reshaping of coastlines and shallow seas created dynamic ecosystems that were continually changing and evolving, providing both challenges and opportunities for life on Earth. The movement of continents also had an impact on the distribution of minerals and resources. As plates shifted and collided, mountains rose, exposing new rocks and minerals to the surface. Rivers carried sediments from these mountains to the oceans, creating fertile deltas and nutrient-rich waters that supported abundant marine life. Volcanic eruptions added elements such as potassium, phosphorus, and other essential nutrients to the soil, promoting the growth of plants and sustaining herbivorous animals. These geological processes were intimately connected to the biological changes happening on the continents, showing how life and the Earth's physical structure evolved together in a tightly linked system. Over tens of millions of years, the continual drifting of continents eventually led to the arrangement of land masses more similar to the modern continents. Laurasia further split into what would become North America, Europe, and Asia, while Gondwana separated into Africa, South America, Antarctica, India, and Australia. Each of these land masses followed its own path of movement, interacting with oceans and climates in unique ways. Life on these continents evolved independently, resulting in the rich diversity of ecosystems and species that we see today. Fossil records from these continents show distinct differences in species, reflecting the long periods of isolation caused by the breakup of Pangia. This isolation also contributed to the development of endemic species, plants and animals that exist only in certain regions, many of which continue to exist in the present day. The breakup of Pangia also influenced the evolution of early humans, much later in geological time. The separation of continents affected climate and habitats, which in turn influenced the migration patterns of mammals, including primates. As continents drifted apart, different groups of mammals evolved in isolation, leading to the diverse array of species that humans would eventually encounter and interact with. River valleys, fertile plains, and newly formed mountain ranges shaped the landscapes where early human ancestors hunted, gathered, and settled. The geological changes set the stage for the complex ecosystems that would support human evolution, demonstrating that the breakup of Pangia had far-reaching effects that extended across millions of years and affected life in countless ways. The story of Pangia's breakup is also recorded in the rocks beneath our feet. Geological evidence such as matching rock formations on different continents, patterns of ancient magnetic fields preserved in volcanic rocks, and the distribution of fossils all provide clues to how the supercontinent split apart. Fossils of the same species found on continents now separated by oceans indicate that these lands were once connected, while magnetic signatures in rocks show the direction and speed at which continents moved. These clues allow scientists to reconstruct the slow, powerful movements of tectonic plates that reshaped the Earth and drove the diversification of life across the globe. The breakup of Pangia was not a single event, but a long, continuous process that took place over tens of millions of years. It involved the stretching, cracking, and drifting of massive landmasses, the eruption of volcanoes, the formation of new oceans, and the fragmentation of ecosystems. This process created a planet in constant flux, where life had to adapt to ever-changing conditions. Species that could move, adapt, or evolve survived and thrived, while others disappeared, leaving behind fossils that tell the story of these ancient transformations. The breakup of Pangia demonstrates the interconnectedness of geology and biology, showing how the movements of the Earth's crust directly influenced the course of evolution and shaped the diversity of life we see today. Even the oceans, which appeared vast and unchanging to the creatures living within them, were dramatically affected by the breakup of the supercontinent. New currents redistributed nutrients and heat across the planet, influencing the growth of plankton and the distribution of fish and marine mammals. Coral reefs shifted, adapted, and sometimes disappeared, while new coastal habitats emerged. The separation of continents created unique marine corridors that allowed species to spread into new areas, encouraging evolutionary experimentation. isolated populations in separate seas evolved independently, leading to distinct marine faunas in different regions of the world. The interplay of shifting continents and oceans thus created a dynamic and ever-changing stage upon which life could diversify in countless directions. The atmosphere was also influenced by these geological changes. Volcanic eruptions released gases that affected both temperature and rainfall, while the rearrangement of continents altered wind patterns, creating deserts, rainforests, and seasonal climates. Areas that had been warm and moist could become dry and arid, and regions that were once cold could experience warming. These atmospheric changes placed immense pressure on species to adapt or migrate. Over millions of years, plants developed new strategies to cope with drought or fluctuating temperatures, and animals evolved new forms of mobility, dietary flexibility, and social behaviors to survive in changing climates. The breakup of Pangia was a grand experiment in adaptation, providing opportunities and challenges that shaped the trajectory of life across the globe. The legacy of Pangia's breakup can still be seen today, not just in the distribution of continents, but in the genetic and fossil records of life on Earth. The differences in species across continents, the similarities that hint at ancient connections, and the patterns of migration and adaptation all trace back to the movements of the supercontinent millions of years ago. Rivers, mountains, deserts, and oceans that exist today were often formed or influenced by the forces that tore Pangia apart. Life on Earth, both past and present, is inseparable from these geological processes. The breakup of Pangia illustrates how the slow, imperceptible movements of the Earth's crust have profound consequences for climate, ecosystems, evolution, and the history of the planet itself. The immense power of tectonic forces that tore Pangia apart also shaped the Earth's surface in ways that would affect life for millions of years. Mountain ranges that rose along rift zones created barriers that influenced weather patterns and migration routes. Plate collisions caused earthquakes that could devastate regions, while volcanic eruptions altered landscapes and climates. These processes created new habitats and ecological niches that life could exploit. The fragmentation of the supercontinent provided a blueprint for the modern world, with continents, oceans, and mountain ranges arranged in a pattern that continues to influence ecosystems, climate, and the evolution of species. Every coast, river, and desert carries the imprint of the forces that once joined the world into a single, massive landmass and then pulled it apart, allowing life to adapt and diversify in the face of constant change. The breakup of Pangia also illustrates the resilience and creativity of life. As continents drifted apart and ecosystems fragmented, species were forced to adapt, migrate, and evolve in response to new challenges. This pressure drove innovation in survival strategies, from the development of wings in some reptiles to the evolution of more efficient metabolisms in mammals. Plants evolved new methods of reproduction, dispersal, and drought resistance, creating diverse forests, grasslands, and deserts that would become the foundation for future ecosystems. The interplay between geological forces and life was a dance that shaped the trajectory of evolution, demonstrating that even the slow, invisible movements of the Earth's crust can have profound and lasting impacts on the living world. The breakup of Pangia was a slow, powerful, and transformative process that remade the planet. The shifting of continents changed climate, ocean circulation, and habitats, forcing life to respond in new and creative ways. Volcanic activity added both destruction and renewal, while rivers, lakes, and shallow seas reshaped the possibilities for migration and survival. As the supercontinent fractured into the landmasses we recognize today, it created the conditions for the incredible diversity of life that would follow, from the smallest plants and insects to the largest mammals and eventually humans. Fossils, rocks, and the very arrangement of continents bear witness to this ancient upheaval, telling a story of Earth's dynamism, resilience, and the intertwined destinies of geology and life. The story of Pangia's breakup is ongoing in a sense, for the continents continue to drift, oceans continue to circulate, and life continues to adapt to the changes. Africa is slowly moving toward Europe, the Pacific Ocean is shrinking as tectonic plates converge, and mountain ranges continue to rise. The Earth remains a dynamic planet shaped by the same forces that split Pangia millions of years ago. Every earthquake, volcanic eruption, and shifting current is a continuation of the processes that began when the supercontinent first fractured. In this way, The breakup of Pangia is not merely an event in the distant past, but a reminder that our planet is alive, restless, and constantly reshaping the world in which life exists. Life on Earth, in all its variety and complexity, owes much to the breakup of Pangia. The isolation of continents encouraged the evolution of unique species, the formation of new ecosystems, and the spread of plants and animals into new territories. The changing climate, driven by shifting oceans and volcanic activity, challenged life to adapt in ways that fostered innovation and diversity. Even the landforms we see today, mountains, valleys, coastlines and plains, are products of the tectonic forces that tore Pangia apart. The story of this supercontinent's division is written across the planet, in stone, in soil, in the fossils of ancient creatures, and in the living descendants that carry forward the legacy of a world once united and now beautifully fragmented. The immense timescale over which Pangia broke apart is difficult to grasp. Over tens of millions of years, continents drifted mere centimetres to metres per year, yet the cumulative effect reshaped the planet. The slow, almost imperceptible motion of the Earth's crust created profound changes that reverberated through every ecosystem, influencing which species survived, which evolved, and which disappeared. Fossil records show the emergence of entirely new forms of life in response to the isolation and environmental pressures caused by the continental breakup. Evolution, climate, geography, and geology were intertwined, each influencing the others in a complex web of cause and effect. The breakup of Pangia was also a lesson in both destruction and opportunity. Forests and plains were fragmented, deserts expanded, and oceans invaded the land, causing local extinctions. Yet these same processes created new habitats, new routes for migration, and new niches for life to exploit. Isolated populations diverged into new species, oceans created corridors for marine life, and mountains provided new environments for adaptation. The slow tearing apart of a supercontinent demonstrated the power of natural forces to reshape life on Earth, illustrating the intimate connection between the planet's physical changes and the evolutionary story of all living things. The influence of Pangia's breakup is still visible in the genetic makeup of species. Scientists can trace lineages back to times when continents were connected, discovering unexpected similarities between species now separated by thousands of kilometers of ocean. The distribution of plants and animals, both living and extinct, reflects the pattern set in motion by the slow drift of continents, the rise of mountains, and the formation of oceans. Life adapted, evolved, and diversified, leaving a trail of evidence that allows us to reconstruct the movements of a world long vanished, providing insight into the immense power of geological processes and the resilience of life. The supercontinent of Pangia, which existed around 300 million years ago, was an amazing and one-of-a-kind landmass that held nearly all of the Earth's continents together as a single huge entity. Its formation brought together lands that we now know as North and South America, Africa, Europe, Asia, and other smaller regions into one giant landmass that stretched across the planet. While we often imagine Pangia as a flat, barren expanse of land, it was anything but lifeless. In fact, it was home to a rich and wide variety of life forms, both plant and animal, each uniquely adapted to the special and sometimes harsh conditions of this vast supercontinent. The flora and fauna of Pangia provide us with a window into a world long gone, a world that was at once familiar in its life forms yet strange in its landscapes, climates, and ecosystems. To truly understand the living tapestry of Pangia, we must journey through its spreading forests, its scorching deserts, its swampy wetlands, and its rough coastlines, exploring the many-sided interplay between its living organisms and the land they lived on. The plant life of Pangia was both abundant and very varied, covering every corner of the supercontinent in green expanses that could range from dense, shadowy forests to open plains dotted with hardy shrubs. In the northern regions, where the climate was cooler and rainfall more frequent, huge forests of ferns, horsetails, and club mosses ruled the landscape. These plants, some of which could grow to very tall heights of over 100 feet, formed thick canopies that shaded the forest floors, creating dark, humid places where smaller plants and countless invertebrates thrived. The ferns of Pangia were not the delicate fronds that we see today. Many were strong, woody plants with large, detailed leaves that caught sunlight well and provided shelter for countless creatures. Horsetails, often mistaken for simple reeds or grasses, were actually complex, ancient plants that thrived in the wet soils along rivers and lakes, their hollow, jointed stems rising in thick groups that could stretch for miles. Club mosses, which might seem small and unnoticeable to modern eyes, were during this time the giants of the plant kingdom, forming tree-like structures that could match the size of present-day pine trees. Together, these plants created forests that were not only beautiful but also important to the survival of many animal species, providing both food and shelter in a world that was still finding its natural balance. Moving further south, the climate of Pangia became warmer and drier, giving rise to different types of plants that were adapted to dry conditions. Vast stretches of conifers and seed ferns ruled these regions, their tough leaves and deep roots allowing them to survive in areas where water was scarce and the sun burned strongly from overhead. Seed ferns, which were a unique group of plants that mixed features of both ferns and modern seed plants, were particularly remarkable. They reproduced using seeds rather than spores, a powerful change that allowed them to spread across drier lands and survive times of drought. Conifers, which included early relatives of modern pines and cypresses, had needle-like leaves coated with a waxy substance to stop water loss, and their cones produced seeds that could last long periods before growing. These plants not only shaped the landscapes of Pangia, but also laid the base for future forests that would continue to change long after the supercontinent itself had begun to break apart. Alongside these large forests and dry plains, wetlands and swampy areas were common in low-lying regions and along the edges of rivers and lakes. These wetlands were home to another layer of plant life, including tall, reed-like plants and an abundance of mosses and ferns that thrived in the damp, nutrient-rich soils. The wetlands were vital natural hubs, supporting both plant and animal life by providing water, shelter, and breeding grounds. Giant club moss trees often rose from these swamps, their massive roots holding them in the soft soil and their branches giving shade and homes for smaller plants and early animals. The wetlands of Pangia were not still. They changed with the seasons, swelling with rainfall and shrinking during drier times, creating a moving environment that encouraged adaptability among the plants and animals that lived there. The coastal regions and river valleys of Pangia were no less alive, hosting a mixture of plant species that could handle both flooding and saltwater exposure. Early mangrove-like plants and salt-tolerant ferns grew along estuaries and tidal flats, their roots holding the soil and stopping erosion, while offering hiding places for young fish and amphibians. Along rivers, trees with strong spreading root systems lined the banks, providing shade and shelter for both water animals and land animals. These areas were rich in nutrients carried by the flowing waters, allowing plants to grow thickly and support a wide variety of life. In these lush corridors, life was particularly active, with competition for sunlight, water, and space shaping the change of plant species over millions of years. While the plant life of Pangia was remarkable in its variety and adaptability, the animal life was equally interesting. The supercontinent was home to a wide array of creatures, ranging from tiny invertebrates to massive reptiles, each filling a particular natural role in this ancient world. In the forests of the northern regions, early amphibians thrived, taking advantage of the abundant water sources and moist soils. These amphibians, some of which could reach lengths of several feet, were the first vertebrates to settle both in water and on land. They fed on insects, small fish, and other invertebrates, playing a crucial role in controlling populations and keeping natural balance. Alongside them, early reptiles began to appear, slowly developing features that would eventually allow them to rule drier habitats as well. The deserts and dry plains of southern Pangia were lived in by early reptiles that were remarkably well suited to the harsh conditions. These creatures, some of which were ancestors of modern lizards and snakes, had tough, scaly skin to stop water loss and were able to get moisture effectively from the food they ate. In addition to these smaller reptiles, Pangia was home to some of the earliest large land predators, which roamed the arid landscapes in search of prey. These predators were often fast and agile, with sharp teeth and strong jaws, able to hunt a variety of animals ranging from insects to smaller reptiles. The interplay between predator and prey created a delicate balance that allowed ecosystems to stay stable, even in the face of extreme environmental conditions. Wetlands and river valleys supported a different set of animals, many of which relied on water for survival. Fish, both freshwater and early brackish species filled the rivers and lakes, feeding on plants, smaller invertebrates, and each other. Amphibians and semi-aquatic reptiles were also abundant, taking advantage of the plentiful water while moving onto land to feed and breed. The wetlands were full of insects, some of which grew to enormous sizes compared to their modern relatives, providing a rich food source for birds and early insect-eating reptiles. Insects played a particularly important role in the ecosystems of Pangia, pollinating plants, breaking down dead matter, and serving as a vital link in the food chain. The sheer abundance and variety of insects added to the complexity and strength of these ancient habitats. The skies above Pangia were alive as well, with early flying reptiles and insects carving out roles in the air. The first true flying reptiles, which evolved from small, quick ancestors, had wingspans that allowed them to glide over forests, deserts, and wetlands, hunting insects and smaller animals or scavenging for food. Dragonfly-like insects, some with wingspans of over 2 feet, ruled the skies, their strong flight allowing them to escape predators and hunt well. These flying creatures not only added a new level to the ecosystems of Pangia, but also helped shape the change of plants, as some insects became early pollinators, helping the spread of seeds and adding to the growth of plant life. Coastal and marine environments were equally full of life. Pangia's seas were home to early fish, mollusks, and other invertebrates, as well as some of the first large marine predators. Coral-like structures, formed by groups of tiny animals, provided shelter and breeding grounds for countless smaller creatures. Along the coastlines, birds and early pterosaur-like reptiles nested in cliffs and trees, taking advantage of abundant food sources in both the land and sea. The interactions between land, freshwater, and marine ecosystems created a web of life that was both complex and interdependent, with energy flowing through the food chains in detailed and fascinating ways. One of the most remarkable things about Pangia's plant and animal life was their adaptability. Life on this supercontinent had to deal with huge temperature changes, ranging from freezing conditions in some northern regions to burning heat in southern deserts. Seasonal changes brought times of drought and flooding, forcing plants and animals to develop ways to survive. Some plants grew deep roots to reach underground water sources, while others produced seeds that could stay inactive until good conditions returned. Animals too evolved behaviors to cope with environmental extremes, such as burrowing to escape heat, moving to find food and water, or developing efficient ways to save moisture. These adaptations not only ensured survival, but also drove evolutionary change, leading to the rise of new species and the slow shaping of the ecosystems that would last long after Pangia began to break apart. The supercontinent also offered unique chances for the movement and spread of species. Because nearly all of the Earth's land was connected, plants and animals could move across huge distances, settling in new habitats and meeting different climates and natural challenges. This connection allowed for great diversity, as species that evolved in one region could spread to others, sometimes meeting new competitors, predators, or environmental pressures that would drive further adaptation. The movement of species across Pangia was a dynamic and ongoing process, shaping the spread of life in ways that would leave a lasting mark even after the continents began to drift apart. Fossil evidence from Pangia provides a vivid record of this amazing diversity. Fossils of plants, from towering club mosses to delicate ferns, show the richness of the vegetation that once covered the supercontinent. Fossilized remains of early reptiles, amphibians, and insects show the wide range of life forms that thrived in different environments, from lush forests to dry plains. Tracks, burrows, and other trace fossils offer glimpses into the behavior of these ancient creatures, showing how they hunted, traveled, and interacted with their surroundings. Together, these fossils paint a picture of a living, breathing world that was active, connected, and full of surprises. It is important to recognize that the plant and animal life of Pangia were not still. Over millions of years, ecosystems changed in response to changing climates, volcanic activity, and the slow movement of the Earth's crust. Species evolved new forms, some disappeared, and others appeared to fill empty natural roles. This constant change created a dynamic and strong biosphere, able to handle challenges and adapt to new conditions. The story of Pangia's life is therefore one of both stability and change, a balance between lasting forms and the steady push of evolution that shaped the world we know today. The climate during Pangia times in the distant past could be extremely harsh and unforgiving, a world where intense heat ruled, where dryness never stopped, and where the weather seemed to have no clear pattern. The sun itself seemed cruel, shining over huge stretches of land that went on without end for hundreds of millions of square miles. Day after day, the heat baked the surfaces of continents, and the ground cracked under the unending sun. This was a world where water was rare and rivers, lakes and streams were often temporary, disappearing as quickly as they appeared. Even areas that might today seem fertile were dry and cracked, turning once green regions into deserts of dust and sand. The soil, exposed to constant sunlight and without thick plants to cover it, became hard and empty, leaving only a few tough plants able to survive. Small bushes and strong, fibrous plants struggled to hold onto the earth, their roots digging deep into the dry ground to find the smallest amounts of water. These plants grew slowly, often taking many years to reach even a few feet in height, and many would not survive sudden and severe temperature changes that could sweep across the land. During these times, heat was not just an occasional problem, it was a force that shaped every part of life. The air itself could feel heavy and dry, carrying dust and sand that swirled across the land. These particles could irritate skin and eyes, making life even harder for animals and early human-like creatures. Daytime temperatures could rise to levels that made survival a daily struggle, while nights offered only a little relief. Even the cooler hours of darkness could not remove the heat stored in rocks and soil, and temperatures might fall only slightly before the sun rose again, unrelenting in its strength. Heat waves, lasting for days or even weeks, could strike without warning, leaving streams dry, plants withered, and the creatures that depended on them desperate for survival. Such extreme heat affected not just daily life but also evolution, as species developed ways to survive in these punishing conditions. The dryness of the climate added another layer of difficulty. Rain was rare and irregular, sometimes coming in sudden and strong storms before disappearing entirely for months at a time. When rain did come, it often fell in heavy bursts that the dry ground could not soak up, causing sudden floods that swept away weak plants or unprotected animals. These floods could carve deep channels and valleys into the land, leaving marks that could last for millions of years. Between storms, long periods of drought stretched on for years, leaving waterholes empty and plants scarce. Animals had to travel long distances to find water, and competition for these limited resources could be fierce, often leading to fights and struggles to survive. The lack of water affected not only animals but also the soil, making it more compact and less able to support plant life. Over time, these cycles of drought and flood created a harsh pattern that shaped the ecosystems of the time, favouring species able to handle the extremes. The unpredictability of the weather made these problems worse. There were no clear seasons or steady patterns. One year might bring a brief heavy rain followed by years of burning heat, while another could bring sudden frost or unexpected storms. This uncertainty meant plants could not know when they might get water, and animals could not know when to move or reproduce. Crops, if any existed, could fail without warning, and the timing of reproduction for many species had to adjust to these changing conditions. Some creatures evolved to store water inside their bodies, or to burrow underground to escape heat and dryness, while others grew tough, scaly skin or thick coats to protect themselves from the sun. Migration patterns could cover hundreds or even thousands of miles, as animals moved in search of food and water, following the uneven and unpredictable cycles of the climate. Wind played a big role in shaping this harsh environment. Strong gusts would blow across deserts and plains, moving sand and dust in clouds that could reduce visibility to almost zero. These winds could take moisture from plants and soil, making dryness worse and survival even harder. The constant movement of sand also reshaped the land, forming shifting dunes and ridges that could bury plants and force animals to adapt quickly. In coastal regions, storms could bring strong winds from the oceans, driving waves onto the land and wearing away shorelines over time. Even far from the seas, wind could carve detailed patterns into rock and soil, leaving behind landscapes both beautiful and dangerous. The extreme heat, dryness, and unpredictable weather affected every living thing. Plants that survived grew thick, waxy leaves to keep water or deep roots to reach underground moisture. Trees, where they existed, grew slowly, and often had few leaves, saving energy and water to survive. Some species produced seeds that could stay dormant for years, waiting for the rare rains to grow. Animals developed many adaptations. Some became active at night to avoid the hot sun, coming out only after sunset to hunt or gather food, while others developed special body parts to store water, release heat, or hide from the landscape. Insects and smaller animals often burrowed underground, hiding from heat and emerging only during cooler times or after rain. Predators in turn changed their hunting strategies to follow prey across vast and harsh lands, learning to survive in a world where food was scarce and conditions were severe. Large environmental changes were also caused by this harsh climate. Glacial and warm periods could happen even in hot regions, as changes in Earth's orbit or volcanic activity affected temperatures and weather. Volcanic eruptions released huge amounts of ash and gases into the air, which could block sunlight and cause sudden drops in temperature. In some cases, these eruptions, combined with extreme heat and dryness, created famine and mass deaths. Forests could burn in wildfires sparked by lightning or dry conditions, leaving behind burned land and smoke-filled air. These fires sometimes made the soil richer afterward, but the immediate damage could wipe out entire groups of plants and animals, forcing survivors to move or adapt fast. Over time, these events pushed evolution, favouring species that could survive both the intense sun and sudden storms and fires. The land itself showed the harshness of the climate. Rocky outcrops and bare cliffs rose above deserts, their surfaces bleached by the relentless sun. Sand and dust covered plains, forming moving dunes that could cover whole areas. Rivers, when they existed, were often seasonal, swelling with brief rains and then shrinking to small pools or disappearing entirely. Lakes and wetlands appeared suddenly, full of life for a short time before drying up completely, leaving cracked and salty beds. Even mountains and highlands were affected. The strong sun and dry air stopped snow and ice from building except at the highest points. The land was always changing, shaped by wind, heat, and water in sudden and dramatic ways. Valleys could form in months during heavy rains, while wind could move sand and soil over decades, changing the look and livability of regions. Over millions of years, these forces created landscapes that were both beautiful and harsh, showing the power of climate to shape the Earth. Life in such a world needed constant alertness and adaptation. Creatures had to be ready for sudden temperature changes or the arrival of rare storms. Finding water could mean travelling long distances across exposed sun-baked land, while avoiding predators required constant awareness and planning. Plants had to survive without steady rain, often producing seeds that waited years for the chance to grow. Reproduction itself was a risk. If conditions were bad, eggs, seeds, or young might not survive. Over long periods, these pressures shaped the behaviour and bodies of every species, creating life forms that were very strong but also highly specialised. Some species thrived during short periods of good weather, only to decline when conditions became harsh again, creating cycles of plenty and scarcity that defined life on Earth. Even the oceans and seas were affected by extreme heat, dryness, and unpredictable weather. Evaporation increased, raising salt levels in shallow waters and creating hard conditions for sea life. Coral reefs, where they existed, could bleach and die during intense heat, leaving only the strongest species to survive. Ocean currents, affected by temperature differences, became less stable, causing changes in nutrient levels and affecting the food available for fish and other sea creatures. Storms from the ocean could strike suddenly, bringing strong winds and waves to coastal areas and reshaping the land. These unpredictable changes in the oceans matched the challenges on land, creating a world where survival depended on flexibility, adaptation, and endurance. Volcanic activity, tectonic shifts movements, and meteorite impacts could exacerbate worsen these harsh conditions. Ash and dust from volcanic eruptions blocked sunlight, temporarily cooling the earth, but often causing acid rain that harmed plants and animals. Earthquakes and volcanic eruptions could change the flow of rivers and create new lakes or destroy old ones. Meteorite impacts, while rare, could have catastrophic, terrible local effects, triggering starting fires, storms, and floods. In a world already ruled by extreme heat and dryness, these sudden events added another layer of unpredictability, uncertainty, and danger. Life had to endure not only the daily challenges of sun, wind, and drought, but also the occasional extraordinary, unusual disaster that could reshape entire regions. The interplay mix between heat, dryness, and unpredictable weather created a feedback loop cycle that intensified, made worse the challenges. Dry soils reflected bounced-back sunlight, increasing local temperatures, while the lack of vegetation allowed more heat to penetrate sink into the ground. Strong winds carried dust and sand over long distances, reducing air quality and further stressing living creatures. When rain did fall, it could cause sudden erosion, washing away, removing topsoil and leaving the land even less able to support plant life. Rivers that once sustained life could dry up almost overnight, and small animals might perish without the ability to migrate quickly enough. These processes worked over decades, centuries, and even millions of years, continuously shaping ecosystems and forcing life to adapt to an environment that was both extreme and unpredictable. Insects, reptiles, and small mammals developed clever strategies to survive these conditions. Many insects could enter states of dormancy deep rest, slowing their metabolism until conditions improved. Reptiles, with their scaly skin and ability to regulate controlled body temperature and sunlight, were better suited than most animals to endure prolonged, long-lasting heat and scarce limited water. Small mammals might burrow underground, creating cool, humid refuges, safe spots in the soil where temperatures were lower and moisture was kept. Birds and larger animals often migrated vast distances, following seasonal or irregular uneven patterns set not by fixed calendars, but by the availability of water and food. These adaptations were not merely survival strategies, they became defining characteristics of species, shaping evolution in ways that would last for millions of years. Over time, these harsh climates influenced the arrangement layout of ecosystems across continents. Forests were restricted, limited to areas where water could be relied upon, often near rivers or lakes that were refilled regularly. Grasslands, deserts, and scrublands expanded in regions where rainfall was insufficient or unpredictable. In each of these zones, life found ways to endure, but only those capable of tolerating handling extreme heat, enduring long periods of dryness, or adapting to sudden changes in weather survived and reproduced. This created a patchwork mix of habitats, each with its own challenges, yet all shaped by the same forces of sun, wind, heat, and water scarcity lack. The creatures of these lands, from the smallest insect to the largest predator, were bound by the same unforgiving climate, and their very existence was a testament proof to the ability of life to adapt in the face of relentless constant adversity. The climate also influenced social and behavioral patterns among species that lived in groups. Herds of animals might cluster near the few remaining water sources, leading to competition, rivalry, and complex interactions within and between species. Predators learned to expect the movements of prey, while prey species developed heightened, sharper senses and defensive strategies to survive in open, exposed landscapes. Cooperation and competition existed side by side, controlled by the scarcity of resources and the unpredictability of the weather. Even species that were capable of flight had to deal with windstorms, dust clouds, and sudden temperature shifts, which could affect migration routes and breeding cycles. Fire, driven by heat and dryness, became a constant presence in many ecosystems. Natural ignitions, sparks from lightning, could start wildfires that swept across grasslands and forests, consuming plants and driving animals to seek refuge. While devastating in the short term, these fires sometimes created opportunities for new growth, clearing old vegetation and allowing hardy species to take root. Fire-adapted plants developed thick bark or seeds resistant to heat, while animals developed the ability to flee or burrow to escape the flames. Over long periods, fire became an important part of the landscape, shaping ecosystems in combination with heat, dryness, and unpredictable weather. The interplay mix of all these factors created a planet in which survival was never guaranteed. Life had to endure searing, burning heat, prolonged long droughts, sudden storms, high winds, and the occasional volcanic eruption or meteorite impact. Every organism, from the smallest microorganism to the largest predator, had to find ways to survive, adapting its behavior, physiology, body functions, and reproductive strategies to the harsh and unforgiving climate. Over millions of years, these challenges shaped evolution, forcing life to become resilient, tough, resourceful, clever, and highly specialized. The fossil record preserves marks of this struggle, showing how species rose and fell in response to the extremes of their environment. Layers of sediment reveal periods of heat and drought, interspersed mixed with evidence of sudden floods or fires. Plant imprints, fossilized skeletons, and ancient soils all tell the story of a world dominated by a climate that was both beautiful in its grandeur and relentless, never ending in its cruelty. The age of Pangea was a world very different from the one we know today. It was a time when all the continents were joined into a single massive landmass, stretching across much of the Earth and creating conditions unlike any that exist now. The atmosphere was thick with carbon dioxide, oxygen levels were much higher than they are today, and the climate was harsh and extreme, with burning heat in the interior lands and huge seasonal swings that could make winters very cold. It was a world that would have seemed unfriendly and unforgiving to most living creatures, yet for insects it became a time of great opportunity. Insects, the small creatures we often overlook today, suddenly found themselves growing well in ways that were unimaginable, growing to enormous sizes and spreading across the vast lands of Pangia in huge numbers. The story of insects during this period is a story of adaptation, survival, and change on a scale that seems almost unbelievable. One of the main reasons insects did well during the time of Pangia was the makeup of the atmosphere. Around 300 million years ago, the levels of oxygen in the air were much higher than they are in modern times, reaching nearly 35% compared to the 21% we have today. This plenty of oxygen had a direct effect on the bodies of insects. Unlike mammals and birds, insects rely on a network of tiny tubes called tracheae to carry oxygen directly to their tissues. The higher the oxygen in the air, the more easily it could move through these tubes, allowing insects to grow larger than they could in a lower oxygen environment. Some species of dragonflies, for example, grew to have wingspans of more than 75 centimeters, almost 3 feet from tip to tip, making them the largest flying insects the world has ever known. Similarly, cockroaches could reach lengths of more than 30 centimeters, and millipedes could stretch to over 2 meters, creeping slowly across the forest floors. These were creatures so large and powerful that they would dwarf most modern insects, yet they lived in a world where such growth was possible because of the very oxygen-rich atmosphere. Another factor that allowed insects to take over during this time was the great amount of plants and decaying organic matter. The interior regions of Pangia were home to huge forests and swampy wetlands, filled with ferns, giant horsetails, seed ferns, and towering coniferous trees. These plants provided both food and shelter for insects, creating a complex web of ecological places that insects could use. Plant-eating insects fed on the leaves, stems, and roots of these plants, while scavengers and decomposers thrived on the constant supply of decaying material that covered the forest floors. Insects like giant cockroaches could feed on fallen leaves, while early beetles burrowed into rotting wood, eating it and breaking it down into nutrients for other life forms. The combination of plenty of food and good shelter allowed insect populations to grow at a speed never seen before, and this in turn created more opportunities for predators, including other insects, to thrive as well. This period saw the rise of complex food webs in which insects were both the main plant eaters and the main prey for larger arthropods, amphibians, and early reptiles. The climate of Pangia, despite its dangers, also played a crucial role in the rise of insects. While the supercontinent experienced extreme heat, massive deserts, and severe seasonal changes, insects were very well suited to cope with these conditions. Their small size, segmented bodies, and exoskeletons provided protection against dehydration, heat, and sudden changes in temperature. Many insects developed behaviors and changes that allowed them to survive in the harshest conditions, such as burrowing into the soil to escape the midday sun, or taking refuge under leaf litter and rotting logs. Seasonal changes prompted bursts of reproduction, with some species laying hundreds or even thousands of eggs at a time, ensuring that at least some offspring would survive the extremes of the Pangian climate. The strength and flexibility of insects allowed them to move into every corner of the supercontinent, from humid swamps to dry deserts, and even the edges of massive inland seas that stretched across Pangia's interior. In addition to environmental factors, evolutionary changes also helped insects thrive during this era. Wings, for example, gave insects the ability to escape predators, explore new places, and reach food sources that would otherwise be out of reach. Early flying insects such as dragonflies and mayflies used their wings not only to hunt, but also to spread across vast distances, linking populations that were otherwise separated by deserts, mountains, and other natural barriers. Other changes, such as the development of hardened exoskeletons, allowed insects to keep moisture and protect themselves from the increasingly harsh climate. Many species also developed specialized mouthparts and digestive systems, enabling them to use new food sources, from tough plant material to decaying flesh. These evolutionary changes, combined with good environmental conditions, created a perfect set of conditions in which insects could grow larger, reproduce faster, and spread into new areas with amazing efficiency. Predation and competition also played a role in shaping the diversity and size of Pangia's insects. In a world where insects were dominant, competition for resources was fierce. Plant-eating insects had to deal not only with one another for leaves, stems, and roots, but also with early amphibians and reptiles that fed on them. Predatory insects such as giant dragonflies and prehistoric mantises developed hunting strategies that allowed them to capture even the fastest prey, using their size, speed, and specialized limbs to dominate the food chain. The pressures of competition and predation created an evolutionary battle in which insects had to adapt quickly or risk extinction. This constant push and pull between predators and prey drove the development of new traits, from stronger wings and faster flight to sharper mandibles and more efficient digestive systems, further boosting the ability of insects to flourish in the Pangian world. Fossil evidence provides a clear window into the world of these giant insects. Fossils from coal-rich deposits in regions that were once swampy forests of Pangia reveal not only the size of these creatures, but also their diversity. Dragonflies with wingspans approaching 3 feet, millipedes longer than 2 meters, and cockroaches the size of modern cats all point to a world in which insects were truly the rulers of the land. These fossils also show detailed structures of wings, legs, and mouth parts, giving scientists insights into how these insects moved, fed, and interacted with their environment. In some cases, fossilized tracks and burrows indicate that insects were not just passive inhabitants of the landscape, but active workers, reshaping the soil, vegetation, and even local ecosystems with their activities. The sheer scale of these fossils is a sign of the amazing conditions of Pangia and the unique adaptations that allowed insects to reach sizes that would be impossible in today's world. Interestingly, the success of insects during Pangia was not only a story of growth, but also of strength in the face of global crises. The supercontinent experienced frequent volcanic eruptions, shifting climates, and episodes of mass extinction that wiped out many other forms of life. Yet insects were remarkably strong, surviving events that destroyed amphibians, early reptiles, and many plants. Their small size, rapid reproduction, and adaptability allowed them to endure changes that would have been disastrous for larger animals. In some ways, the success of insects during this period laid the foundation for their continued dominance in the millions of years that followed. Even as Pangaea began to break apart and climates changed, insects were able to diversify, move into new continents, and continue evolving into the vast array of species we see today. The rise of insects during the Pangian age also had big effects on the ecosystems around them. As insects grew larger and more numerous, they became a major influence on plant life, soil composition, and the food web. Plant-eating insects affected the growth and spread of plants by feeding on leaves, stems, and roots, while decomposers helped recycle nutrients back into the soil, supporting new generations of vegetation. Predatory insects controlled populations of other arthropods and smaller animals, keeping a balance within the ecosystem. In this way, insects were not merely inhabitants of the world, they were key players in shaping it. The vast swarms of insects, the towering dragonflies, and the immense millipedes were forces of nature, contributing to the dynamics of Pangaea in ways that are difficult to fully understand today. It is also fascinating to consider the social and behavioral aspects of these giant insects. While direct evidence is limited, some fossil findings suggest that certain species may have shown behaviors similar to those of modern social insects such as ants, bees, and termites. Colonies or groups of insects could have worked together, defended territories, and used food sources in complex ways. Even solitary species may have shown advanced hunting strategies, migration patterns, or reproductive behaviors that allowed them to survive in a world filled with predators and environmental challenges. The combination of physical adaptations, ecological roles, and possible behavioral complexity paints a picture of a lively, busy world in which insects were among the most successful and fascinating creatures on the planet. The supercontinent of Pangaea, which existed around 300 million years ago, was home to some of the most extreme, harsh, and vast huge deserts the Earth has ever known. These deserts were not merely stretches of sand or stone, they were enormous, sprawling landscapes, huge, wide landscapes that extended far beyond anything we see on our modern continents today. The sheer size of these deserts was staggering, covering millions of square kilometers and dominating large portions of the central areas of Pangia. Unlike today's deserts, which are often separated by mountains, oceans, or rivers, the deserts of Pangia were continuous and uninterrupted, joined together with no breaks, creating a hostile environment, unfriendly place that shaped the climate, the living organisms, and even the patterns of wind and rainfall across the entire supercontinent. The heat in these deserts was intense, very strong, often rising to levels that would have been unbearable for most forms of life. The sun's rays fell relentlessly non-stop on the barren ground, baking the surface and creating vast areas, huge areas of cracked earth and shifting sands, moving sands. The air was dry and heavy, carrying dust and fine sand across the desert plains, creating frequent common sandstorms that could last for days, sweeping across the land and eroding, wearing down rock formations in their path. These storms were so powerful that they left marks on the landscape that are still visible in the fossil record today, showing layers of sand and silt that were carried hundreds of kilometers from their origin. Water in these deserts was scarce and precious, rare and valuable. Rivers were few and far between, often seasonal, appearing only during rare periods of rainfall. When they did flow, they carried a thin, silty, muddy water that would vanish quickly under the scorching sun. Lakes, if they existed at all, were shallow and prone to drying up, likely to dry out, leaving behind salt flats and mineral deposits that painted the landscape in brilliant bright white and orange hues. Despite these harsh conditions, tough conditions, life found ways to persist. Plants that survived were hardy, tough, and well adapted to the extreme dryness, very dry climate. Fossil evidence shows that tough, drought-resistant vegetation, including early forms of conifers, ferns, and seed ferns, managed to cling to the soil, their roots digging deep to tap into underground moisture. These plants were not plentiful, but they formed small, scattered oases, green spots, that provided shelter and food for the creatures that roamed the deserts. Early reptiles, small amphibians, and numerous invertebrates inhabited these regions. Their bodies adapted to conserve water and tolerate heat. Some burrowed beneath the surface to escape the sun, while others developed scales or tough skin to reduce water loss. Insects and arthropods thrived in the sand, feeding on the sparse little plant life in each other, forming intricate, complex food webs that sustained life in a landscape that seemed almost lifeless. The ground itself was a dynamic surface, constantly changing surface. Sand dunes moved slowly under the influence of constant winds, reshaping the terrain in patterns that could change within months or years. Rocky outcrops jutted out, stuck out from the desert floor, remnants of ancient mountains and erosion-resistant formations that offered shelter and shade. The interplay mix between wind, heat, and erosion created a landscape of constant change where no single place remained the same for long. Climate patterns in Pangia's super-deserts, huge deserts, were extreme and unpredictable. Some years might bring brief rains, causing sudden blooms, bursts of vegetation, and temporary rivers, while other years could see prolonged droughts, long dry periods that made survival a constant struggle. Temperature swings were dramatic, with scorching daytime heat followed by chilling, very cold nights, testing the resilient strength of all living organisms. These harsh conditions influenced migration and survival strategies, forcing animals and plants to adapt quickly or die. The deserts also shaped the larger environment of Pangia. By absorbing vast amounts of solar heat, they influenced wind patterns and the movement of air masses across the supercontinent. This in turn affected rainfall in distant regions, creating a ripple effect chain reaction that could extend to the coastal areas and mountain ranges of Pangia. These deserts were not isolated. They interacted with the surrounding lands, changing the climate of forests, river valleys, and even the oceans. The fossil record reveals traces of life struggling against these conditions. Fossils of reptiles with specialized teeth for eating tough, dry plants, and amphibians adapted to temporary water sources are found in ancient desert sediments. Footprints, burrows, and fossilized nests show that animals found ways to shelter themselves from heat and predators, demonstrating resilience and ingenuity, strength and cleverness in an unforgiving environment. Mineral deposits left behind in these deserts tell stories of drying lakes, evaporating ponds, and shifting sands. Salt layers, gypsum deposits, and sandstone formations provide evidence of ancient conditions, showing how wind, water, and heat sculpted the land over millions of years. The colour and composition of these deposits help scientists reconstruct the appearance of Pangia's deserts, revealing a world of orange and red sands, pale mineral flats, and scattered rocky outcrops. Life in the deserts of Pangia was a delicate balance, fragile balance. Plants needed moisture to survive, yet water was fleeting. Animals depended on plants and each other for food, but the scarcity of resources, lack of resources meant competition was intense. Survival strategies were diverse. Some animals became nocturnal, emerging only at night to avoid the heat. Others travelled great distances to find water. Some evolved protective coverings to retain moisture. Over time, these strategies led to evolutionary changes that would shape the descendants of desert dwellers for millions of years. Winds were a constant force in these deserts, shaping not only the sand dunes but also the climate. Hot, dry winds carried dust across the land, sometimes reaching hundreds of kilometres, affecting air quality and soil conditions even in regions beyond the deserts. The movement of air masses contributed to erosion, transported sediments, and helped form unique geological structures that still fascinate scientists today. These deserts also played a role in global carbon cycles and climate regulation. Sparse vegetation meant that carbon dioxide levels changed differently than in heavily forested regions, affecting atmospheric composition and long-term climate trends. The interaction between deserts, forests, mountains, and oceans created complex feedback systems, complicated loops that influence weather patterns across the entire supercontinent. Some deserts in central Pangia were likely enormous huge salt flats, created by repeated cycles of flooding and drying. Seasonal rivers and temporary lakes would deposit minerals, and as the water evaporated, thick layers of salt and gypsum remained. These mineral-rich areas could be hundreds of kilometres across, reflecting sunlight and making the land even hotter during the day. The boundaries of these deserts were not sharply defined, clearly marked. They merged gradually into semi-arid regions, scrublands, and seasonal floodplains. Transitional zones, border areas, supported a slightly greater diversity of life, including more lush vegetation and a higher density of animals. These areas acted as corridors for migration paths for movement and sources of genetic exchange between populations, helping maintain biodiversity despite the overall harshness of the environment. Fossilized remains indicate that some early reptiles were specialized for desert life, developing elongated limbs for running across sand, efficient kidneys for conserving water, and behaviors that minimized exposure to the harsh sun. Invertebrates such as early insects and arachnids thrived in burrows and under rocks, feeding on plant detritus waste or smaller animals, contributing to a complicated desert ecosystem. The deserts were also a place of geological change. Wind-blown sand slowly wore down rock formations, creating arches, cliffs, and plateaus. Periodic volcanic activity in some regions added layers of ash and lava, altering soil composition and providing minerals that occasionally supported plant life. Earthquakes, tectonic shifts, and erosion continuously reshaped the landscape over millions of years, making these deserts dynamic, ever-changing environments. The extreme conditions of these deserts meant that life had to adapt quickly or face extinction. Drought-resistant plants evolved deep roots and tough leaves. Animals developed behaviors and physical adaptations to survive heat and scarcity of water. Even small microhabitats such as shaded crevices, temporary pools, or nutrient-rich soil patches became crucial for the survival of desert species. Fossilized pollen, spores, and plant impressions provide evidence of these adaptations, showing that life persisted even in a seemingly inhospitable, unfriendly environment. These deserts were not silent. They were shaped by natural forces that interacted constantly. Sand moved with the wind, rivers flowed briefly after rains, animals migrated, and the sun and heat sculpted the land. The deserts of Pangia were living landscapes in their own way, with constant motion and change, a testament to the power of Earth's forces and the resilient strength of life. The scale of these deserts was unprecedented, unmatched. Stretching across hundreds of millions of square kilometers, they covered the central part of Pangia, forming a barrier to moisture and creating a rain shadow effect dry zone on regions beyond. Coastal areas may have seen more moderate conditions, but the interior deserts remained hot, dry, and inhospitable, hard to live in for most species. The presence of such vast arid regions influenced evolutionary trajectories, forcing life to adapt to extreme dryness, very dry conditions, and shaping the future development of species long after Pangaea began to break apart around 200 million years ago. Even as the continents shifted and new oceans formed, the legacy remains of these deserts stayed in the fossil record and the geological formations they left behind. Ancient sandstones, mineral deposits, and eroded rock formations provide clues to scientists about the magnitude, great size, and conditions of these deserts, allowing modern researchers to reconstruct the environments in remarkable detail. These deserts also illustrate the interaction between climate, geography, and life. They were both a product of and a force shaping the supercontinent, influencing wind patterns, rainfall distribution, and the movement of animals and plants. The deserts of Pangaea were not simply empty spaces. They were dynamic systems where heat, wind, water, and life interacted in complex, complicated ways. Over many millions of years, even the smallest bits of life that managed to survive in these huge deserts helped plants and animals slowly spread across the vast land of Pangaea. Tiny seeds, carried by the wind or by wandering animals, could take root far away, linking groups of plants that would have otherwise stayed isolated from one another. Rivers, which often appeared only for short periods, gave certain water-living creatures a chance to survive and move to new places. In this way, the deserts, although harsh and difficult, became a training ground for life, a place where living things slowly learned, changed, and adapted. These long, slow changes shaped entire ecosystems that continued to influence life long after the great supercontinent began to break apart. Fossils also show that the deserts were not always dry and lifeless. From time to time, extreme events struck suddenly, like fast and powerful flash floods or short bursts of rain that felt almost like mini-monsoons. When these rare moments happened, parts of the desert could transform overnight into green, lively landscapes. Plants sprouted quickly, insects multiplied in huge numbers, and animals rushed to take advantage of the sudden food and water. Though these wet periods lasted only a short while before the dryness returned, they left clear marks in the layers of rock and sand. Over millions of years, this repeating cycle, first long drought, then a brief burst of life, helped create species that were incredibly tough, flexible, and capable of surviving extreme change. The deserts of Pangaea were like strict and unforgiving teachers. They shaped the natural world through endless heat, shifting dunes, fierce dryness, and very limited water. Their enormous size and intense conditions influenced the climate not only in the regions they covered, but also far beyond, reaching places hundreds of miles away. These deserts pushed both plants and animals to their absolute limits and forced them to invent new ways to survive. They were one of the most powerful features of the supercontinent, and they continue to be a key piece of the puzzle when scientists try to understand what Earth was like hundreds of millions of years ago. The seasons during Pangaea were not gentle or predictable. Summers burned with a heat so strong that the land itself seemed to smoke, and the sun appeared to hang in the sky like a relentless, unyielding eye. During these long months, the heat would rise from the surface of the Earth, and the air above would shimmer with waves of warmth, making it almost impossible for any living creature to find true comfort. Water sources dried up quickly under this blazing sun. Rivers and lakes, which might have offered even the smallest bit of relief, shrank into narrow, shallow channels or vanished completely. The ground cracked into sharp patterns, and dust storms could rise without warning, sweeping across the land and turning the air thick and almost impossible to breathe. Plants that could survive these conditions were few, and only the toughest forms of life, including certain insects and small reptiles, could endure the relentless summer heat. As the summer heat finally began to fade, the Earth did not slowly cool in a gentle way. Instead, a sharp and sudden change would happen, dropping temperatures down toward bitter, almost unbelievable lows. Winters arrived with a harshness that seemed to catch the world off guard. Frost and ice would cover the ground, freezing rivers that had barely survived the summer. Snow might fall in large, blinding sheets, covering the land in silence, while the winds cut across the empty plains with a sharpness that could chill the bones. Animals that had survived the burning heat of summer now faced the challenge of finding food under layers of ice and snow. Many creatures would dig deep into the earth or sleep in protected areas, waiting for a break that might feel impossibly far away. Trees and other plants, already weakened by the summer's extreme conditions, often struggled to survive, and some would die off completely, leaving the land even more empty and bare. Between these extremes, the changes offered little comfort. Spring and autumn, which in more mild times might have been seasons of renewal and gentle change, were instead short and unpredictable. One day could bring a sudden warm breeze, only to be followed by a night of harsh frost. The weather seemed to swing without warning, making survival a constant challenge for all life forms. Animals could not rely on the usual signs of the seasons to guide their movements, reproduction, or feeding patterns. Plants, too, could not count on the rhythms of sunlight and rainfall to direct growth. Seeds might sprout only to be destroyed by an unexpected frost, while young plants could be burned by a sudden heat wave before they had a chance to take root properly. The chaos of the seasons created huge pressures on ecosystems. Life had to change quickly or face extinction. Some species developed thick shells or skins to shield themselves from both heat and cold. Others learned to dig or hide during the most extreme conditions. Water became the most precious resource, and creatures would often travel long distances to reach shrinking streams or pools that had not yet dried or frozen. Predators, too, were affected, as prey became scarce during the most severe parts of the year. Food chains were fragile, and the balance of life could tip in a single season, wiping out certain species completely and giving an advantage to others that were better suited to endure the chaos. The land itself was reshaped by these extreme seasonal swings. Wearing away from violent summer storms could carve new channels and gullies into the earth, while freezing winters could crack rocks and break apart soil that had been baked hard under the summer sun. The mix of heat, cold, and shifting moisture created a constantly changing land, one that rarely offered stable ground or reliable shelter. Mountains, plains, and riverbeds were all affected. Their shapes slowly changed over many cycles of extreme weather. Even the air seemed restless, carrying dust, pollen, and debris in unpredictable ways, sometimes blocking vision and making travel dangerous for any creature moving across the terrain. Humans, if they had existed in these times, would have found the seasons nearly impossible to endure without shelter, clothing, and a steady supply of food and water. Crops could not reliably grow from year to year, as frost or heat could destroy them before they matured. Animals for hunting or farming might not survive long enough to support a community. Wandering patterns would have been driven almost entirely by the survival needs dictated by the unpredictable swings of weather, forcing constant movement in search of more forgiving conditions. Settlements, if any existed, would need to be protected against both heat and cold, with strategies to store water during droughts and protect food from freezing temperatures. Even geological and atmospheric events were affected by the seasonal chaos. Air currents became wild, creating violent storms and unpredictable winds. Thunderstorms could appear with little warning, bringing rain in some areas and leaving nearby regions completely dry. The cycle of freezing and thawing affected the stability of the soil, triggering landslides or mudflows that reshaped the land in sudden bursts of destruction. The contrast between the extreme heat of summer and the piercing cold of winter contributed to a world that was alive with constant movement and change, never resting, never calm. Water was especially central to survival in this wild climate. Rivers and lakes were inconsistent and sometimes disappeared completely during the heat of summer, only to be refilled during sudden rainstorms or snowmelt in the winter or spring. This unpredictability forced both plants and animals to develop amazing toughness. Some plants grew deep root systems to reach underground water, while others stored moisture in thick leaves or stems. Animals changed by storing fat or water in their bodies, travelling great distances, or digging deep into the ground to escape the worst conditions. Survival was a test of endurance, cleverness, and timing, as the chaotic seasons offered few chances for rest or recovery. The effect of the chaotic seasons on the variety of life in the region was huge. Species that could not change quickly enough were driven to extinction, while those with flexible survival strategies spread. The constant environmental pressure encouraged evolutionary testing, pushing life forms toward remarkable adaptations. Creatures developed protective coverings, efficient ways of saving energy and water, and behaviors that allowed them to avoid the worst extremes of the seasons. Yet even these adaptations were tested to the limits, as a single unusually harsh summer or unexpected winter could destroy entire populations. Plants had to cope with both extremes of temperature and with uneven rainfall. Some tough trees developed thick bark to resist burning sun and frost damage alike. Others developed seeds that could lie asleep for years, waiting for a brief moment of good conditions before sprouting. Shrubs and grasses evolved to grow quickly after rare rainfalls, finishing their life cycles in weeks rather than months. These adaptations created a patchwork of ecosystems, each uniquely shaped to survive the unpredictable swings of heat and cold, dryness and occasional moisture. Animals were under even more constant threat, as the seasons dictated not only their survival, but also their reproduction. Some species timed their reproductive cycles to brief periods of warmth or rainfall, while others produced young that could survive extreme conditions. Travelling became a common survival strategy for many, with herds and flocks moving across vast distances to find areas where the seasonal extremes were less severe. Predators followed these movements, creating shifting interactions between species that could change dramatically from one season to the next. Life during this period was a constant struggle, a high-stakes contest between the environment and those who lived in it. The chaotic seasons also influenced the chemistry and structure of the soil. Extreme heat could dry and harden the surface, making it difficult for roots to push through, while sudden freezing and thawing cycles could break up hard earth and move nutrients in unpredictable ways. Rainfall, when it came, often washed away topsoil, leaving empty patches where only the most tough plants could grow. These soil conditions further increased the survival challenges for both plants and animals, creating a land that was always changing and rarely forgiving. Over long periods, the seasonal chaos shaped the evolution of life in dramatic ways. The species that survived were those that could respond quickly to environmental changes, either through flexible behavior or physical adaptations. Over generations, this led to the rise of highly specialized traits, from heat-resistant skin to cold-tolerant body systems. Life became a constant negotiation with the environment, where survival depended not only on strength, but also on timing, strategy, and the ability to endure extremes that might seem unthinkable by modern standards. Even the skies reflected the chaotic rhythms of the seasons. Summer brought intense sunlight, and at times sweltering air currents that could create towering dust storms. Winter skies were often grey and heavy, with clouds that could release sudden snow or sleet. Winds shifted unpredictably, sometimes bringing sudden cold or heat from distant regions. The atmosphere was a restless, ever-changing force, one that influenced every aspect of life below, from the growth of plants to the movement and behavior of animals. In this world of seasonal chaos, the idea of comfort or stability was almost entirely absent. Life had to be constantly alert and responsive, with survival depending on a mix of adaptation, toughness, and sometimes sheer luck. The land itself bore the marks of this relentless struggle, with worn landscapes, shifting riverbeds, and a tapestry of ecosystems that were constantly being reshaped by heat, cold, drought, and storms. At last, the burning summers, freezing winters, and the fragile short moments in between created a world where the very rhythm of life was dictated by extremes. Adaptation was not a choice but a necessity. Survival depended on a delicate balance of preparation and reaction, of toughness and flexibility, in a planet where the seasons themselves seemed to challenge every living creature to endure, to change, and to continue in a harsh and unforgiving dance of life. The chaos of the seasons also shaped long-term ecological and evolutionary patterns. Certain areas might become deserts during long heat periods, and then partly recover with the melting of winter snows. Animals and plants developed cycles of growth, sleep, and reproduction that were closely tied to the extremes of temperature and availability of water. The environment rewarded cleverness and punished weakness, creating a natural laboratory of survival in which only the adaptable could thrive. Even the smallest organisms were influenced by these changes. Microbial life in soil and water had to cope with both drought and freezing, often surviving by forming protective cysts or spores. Insects timed their life cycles to brief windows of good conditions, appearing quickly, reproducing, and disappearing before the next extreme arrived. Life existed in a delicate balance with the rhythm of the seasons, and the planet's ecosystems were in a constant state of tension, driven by the forces of heat and cold, drought and thaw. Over hundreds of years and even many thousands of years, the endless pattern of burning heat followed by bitter cold slowly reshaped the entire planet. These wild swings in temperature did far more than make life uncomfortable. They carved deep, permanent marks into the land, the air, and the creatures that struggled to survive. The madness of the seasons was not just a short-term problem, it was a mighty force of nature that pushed life to change, twisting and shaping species, landscapes, and whole ecosystems under constant pressure. In a world like this, survival became the greatest achievement of all, and adaptation was the only real weapon against a planet where summers blazed like fire, winters froze everything solid, and hardly any calm existed between these extremes. These chaotic seasons created a world full of striking contrasts. A river might overflow with rushing water during one season, only to shrink into a cracked empty channel during the next. A valley might burst into brief fragile greenery after a rare rainfall, only to be stripped bare again by scorching sunlight and howling winds. Animals had to develop astonishing toughness, travelling great distances without rest as they searched for food, water, and safe shelter. This constant struggle pushed evolution into overdrive, allowing new and remarkable forms of life to appear, creatures built to survive even the most merciless parts of this harsh world. In this land ruled entirely by extremes, life never had a moment to relax. Nothing was predictable. Only the strongest, smartest, and most adaptable creatures could endure the intense heat and the piercing cold. The burning summers and freezing winters were not just ordinary weather. They were powerful forces that shaped everything on Earth. They influenced tiny microorganisms hiding in damp soil, great predators roaming across vast plains, shallow ponds on the lowlands, and towering mountains rising into thin air. Every corner of the planet was moulded by the wild, unpredictable rhythm of the seasons. The endless battle between scorching summers and icy winters left marks everywhere. The ground cracked and scarred. Forests grew and vanished. Lakes appeared, dried up, and then reformed. Creatures either adapted to these changes, moved to new regions, or vanished forever. Year after year, season after season, the planet delivered new trials. Each cycle brought a fresh struggle to overcome, and life was forced to transform again and again. Through this fierce and unforgiving dance of heat and cold, the world continued to evolve, and the echoes of these ancient struggles would ripple through countless generations to come. The Earth during the time of the late Permian period, roughly around 252 million years ago, was a world in trouble, a place of both great beauty and terrifying destruction. Among the most violent and terrifying forces shaping this ancient world were the volcanoes, not the small, gentle eruptions that one might see today, but huge, roaring giants that threw out melted rock and deadly gases into the sky in amounts that go beyond modern understanding. These eruptions were not separate or short. They were enormous, lasting over hundreds of thousands of years in some regions, and their effects could be felt across whole continents. The skies above these lands were often filled with thick clouds of smoke, ash, and poisonous gases, turning day into a dim, threatening twilight, and changing the very air that living creatures depended upon into a deadly, choking cloud. The volcanic activity during this time was especially centered in areas that are today known as Siberia, where huge flood basalt eruptions happened, forming what scientists call the Siberian traps. These eruptions poured out large amounts of melted lava that spread over millions of square kilometers, creating layers upon layers of hardened rock, sometimes more than 3 kilometers thick. The huge size of these eruptions was shocking. Lava flows moved like slow rivers of fire, destroying forests, swamps, and everything in their path. Trees and plants were burned in moments, and the animals that had no way of escape were trapped and turned to ash or burned remains. Yet it was not just the lava that made these volcanic events so deadly. The gases released into the air were far more sneaky, invisible killers that spread across the world. Volcanoes release many types of gases, but during the huge eruptions of the late Permian, the air became filled with carbon dioxide, sulfur dioxide, methane, and other poisonous chemicals. Carbon dioxide, while naturally present in the air, was suddenly released in huge amounts, trapping heat and pushing global temperatures higher. Sulfur dioxide mixed with moisture in the air to form acid rain, which fell in heavy sheets, burning skin, eating away leaves, and breaking down the protective layers of ancient soils. The methane released added to the warming, creating a greenhouse effect so strong that it likely caused the oceans to heat to deadly temperatures. Many sea creatures, from tiny plankton to huge fish, could not survive these extreme conditions. The waters became poisonous and layered, with oxygen-rich water on top and oxygen-poor, choking water beneath. The skies above these volcanic regions were a wild mixture of smoke, ash, and poisonous gases. During the height of an eruption, the sun would often be blocked by thick clouds of ash, creating an eerie, dim light that lasted for days or even weeks. Daylight was muted to a dull reddish glow, and temperatures could swing wildly between burning heat during the day and freezing cold at night as the sun's warmth was blocked from reaching the ground. Rainfall, if it happened at all, was often highly acidic, scraping the land and killing plants that had survived the first lava flows. Wind carried clouds of ash thousands of kilometers away, dropping fine particles that choked animals and humans alike, covered vegetation in a smothering layer of dust, and disrupted photosynthesis, leading to large starvation among plant-eating animals. The eruptions also had deep effects on the oceans. As volcanic gases entered the air and reacted with water, they led to acidification, which made it extremely hard for creatures with shells or skeletons made of calcium carbonate to survive. Coral-like organisms, ammonites, brachiopods, and many plankton species struggled to form protective shells, weakening whole food chains. The oceans, once full of life, became hostile places, and sea extinctions rose sharply. At the same time, huge amounts of methane from seabed clathrates may have been released as ocean temperatures rose, adding fuel to the greenhouse effect and pushing global warming to levels never seen in Earth's history up to that time. The land was not spared either. Forests were burned, rivers were polluted with volcanic debris and acidic runoff, and the soils that had once supported a rich variety of plants became lifeless wastelands. The mix of heat, poisonous gases, and acid rain led to huge die-offs of both plants and animals. Reptiles, amphibians, and early mammal-like creatures struggled to find shelter and food. Even small insects and invertebrates, which are often more tough against environmental changes, face sharp drops in numbers. The once lively landscapes became empty, dead stretches, marked with the skeletons of creatures that had once moved freely. The air itself was changed. Clouds of ash and gas could stay for months and in some cases years, reducing the amount of sunlight that reached the Earth's surface. This volcanic winter effect caused temperatures to fall in certain regions, creating a dangerous mix of global warming and local cooling. The strange mix of heat and cold created a climate that was extremely unstable and unpredictable. Seasonal patterns were disrupted, rainfall became irregular, and storms of unheard-of strength swept across the continents. The very air that living beings relied upon became a carrier of poison, carrying both heat-trapping gases and choking ash. Breathing itself became a struggle, and many creatures died simply because they could not take in clean, oxygen-rich air. Some of the deadliest gases released included hydrogen sulfide, which is highly poisonous and can cause breathing failure even in very small amounts. When released in large amounts from volcanic eruptions, it would have poisoned both land and sea. In the oceans, hydrogen sulfide could lead to huge fish kills and the death of other sea life. In the air, it would have added to a layer of poisonous haze, further lowering the amount of sunlight and increasing the stress on both plants and animals. The combined effects of carbon dioxide, methane, sulfur dioxide, and hydrogen sulfide created an almost unlivable environment across much of the planet. The results of these huge eruptions were long-lasting. The Siberian traps, for example, erupted over a period of roughly 1 million years, releasing steady plumes of lava and gases. This was not a short episode, but a long period of environmental disaster that reshaped the world. Whole species disappeared, ecosystems collapsed, and the very pattern of life was changed. Fossil evidence shows that up to 96% of sea species and about 70% of land vertebrates vanished during this period, making it the most severe mass extinction event in Earth's history. Plants that once thrived in huge forests gave way to tougher, more drought-resistant species, and the survivors were forced to adapt to a planet that had become far more hostile than ever before. Volcanic eruptions also triggered secondary disasters. The strong heat from lava flows could start huge wildfires, which spread across continents, destroying forests and releasing additional carbon dioxide into the already overloaded air. The mix of fires, ash clouds, and poisonous gases created a cycle of destruction, making recovery slow and difficult. Rivers and lakes filled with volcanic debris and acidic water became unfit for most life, while soils lost their richness, stopping new plant growth for decades or centuries. The long-term effects of these eruptions were felt for millions of years, shaping the evolution of life and the makeup of the Earth's air. The poisonous skies of the late Permian were not just a scientific curiosity, they were a life-threatening danger to all living things. The air, once a source of life, became a deadly mix of poisons. The Earth's protective layers were weakened, and the delicate balance of ecosystems collapsed. Creatures that had survived past climate changes found themselves unable to cope with the combined effects of heat, acid rain, and poisonous gases. The planet was a furnace of fire and a pot of poison, and only the most adaptable life forms managed to survive. Evidence from modern geology and the study of fossils allows scientists to rebuild this terrifying period with great detail. Layers of volcanic rock, ash deposits, and chemical clues in ancient sediments tell the story of a world in chaos. Fossilized remains of plants and animals give snapshots of suffering and survival, showing which species could handle the heat and the poisons, and which disappeared forever. The Siberian traps, still visible today, are a sign of the scale and power of these eruptions, a reminder that the Earth is able to unleash forces far beyond human understanding. The connection between volcanic eruptions and the air also shows the complex relationship between geological activity and climate. Volcanic gases changed the makeup of the air, which in turn affected temperatures, weather patterns, and ocean chemistry. This dynamic mix created a chain of environmental pressures, showing how connected life and the Earth itself are. The deadly clouds that once hung over the planet were not just a product of fire and lava, but of chemistry, physics, and the movement of Earth's tectonic plates. The release of gases during eruptions was made worse by the huge size and frequency of the events, leading to long periods of air toxicity that no single species could escape. The extinction event linked with these volcanic eruptions also serves as a reminder of the weakness of life. Even the largest and most powerful species were not safe. Reptiles that had ruled the land, huge amphibians, and early synapsids all faced sharp drops in population. Many invertebrates, from trilobites to insects, suffered severe reductions or complete local extinction. Plant life too suffered, with many ancient forests replaced by scrubby vegetation that could survive in harsher conditions. Recovery was slow and unsure, with ecosystems taking millions of years to regain complexity and variety. In many ways, the late Permian volcanism shows the power of Earth's natural systems to change life on a global scale. Lava and gases, released over huge areas and long times, created an environmental crisis unlike any other. Poisonous skies and burning landscapes reshaped continents, changed oceans, and forced life to adapt in dramatic ways. The mark of these eruptions can be seen not only in the fossil record, but also in the very geology of the planet, a permanent reminder of the potential for destruction in volcanic activity. The story of volcanoes and poisonous skies during the late Permian is a story of extremes: extreme heat, extreme poison, and extreme destruction. It was a time when the air itself could kill, when the land burned and the seas boiled, when life was pushed to the edge of survival. It is a story that highlights the close connection between Earth's geological forces and the life that lives on it. By studying these ancient eruptions, scientists learn not only about the history of our planet, but also about the delicate balance that allows life to thrive. The events of 252 million years ago serve as both a warning and a lesson, showing that even the mightiest species must bow to the power of fire, gas, and poison in the air. The volcanic eruptions of the Siberian traps and elsewhere were huge events that reshaped the Earth. Lava flows covered very large regions, ash clouds blocked the sun, poisonous gases filled the air, oceans became acidic and choking, and life was forced into a struggle for survival on a never-before-seen scale. The consequences were immediate and long-lasting, altering the course of evolution and leaving a mark on the planet that can still be studied today. The poisonous skies of the late Permian were a deadly cloak over the Earth, a reminder of the raw, unyielding power of volcanoes and the weakness of life in the face of such forces. The full extent of the destruction caused by these eruptions is difficult to understand. Entire ecosystems disappeared, leaving behind empty landscapes marked only by the skeletal remains of once thriving life. Oceans that had been rich in biodiversity were reduced to harsh environments. Forests that had provided shelter, food, and oxygen were reduced to burned remnants. The air, mixed with carbon dioxide, sulfur dioxide, methane, and hydrogen sulfide, was a deadly mix that few species could endure. Life that survived had to adapt to new extremes, evolve quickly, or face extinction. Even today, the Siberian traps and other ancient volcanic deposits serve as geological records, preserving the story of a world reshaped by fire and poison. Layers of basalt, ash, and chemical traces in sediment reveal the strength, length, and impact of these eruptions. Fossils trapped within these layers tell tales of death, survival, and the slow, hard recovery of life. The late Permian eruptions, massive and ongoing, were not simply geological events. They were agents of transformation, forces that reshaped the planet on every level: atmosphere, land, and sea. The poisonous skies of the late Permian, filled with volcanic gases and ash, stand as a proof of the raw power of the Earth. They remind us that life on this planet has always been subject to forces far beyond its control, forces capable of altering the course of evolution and reshaping the environment on a global scale. The lessons from this period are kept in the rocks, the fossils, and the very air we breathe today, offering a window into a time when the world was covered by fire, smoke, and deadly gases, and when survival depended on adaptability, strength, and the sheer will to endure. The era of volcanic chaos during the late Permian shows how the combination of heat, poisonous gases, acid rain, and lava flows created an environment that was nearly impossible to live in. It is a story of destruction, strength, and transformation, showing how Earth's most violent forces can create both destruction and the conditions for new forms of life to slowly appear. Life was forced to face the most extreme challenges imaginable, moving through a world where the skies themselves were filled with poison, where the land was a furnace, and where the seas had turned against those who depended upon them. The echoes of these eruptions continue to be felt through geological time, providing a powerful lesson in the potential for nature to use absolute and overwhelming power. The skies of the late Permian, thick with volcanic ash and poisonous gases, were more than just a dramatic backdrop to the end Permian extinctions. They were active participants in the global environmental crisis. By altering temperatures, blocking sunlight, acidifying rain, and choking life, these volcanic eruptions reshaped the biosphere and left a lasting mark on the history of our planet. They remind us that the Earth's natural forces, while sometimes silent and slow-moving, can erupt with a fury capable of reshaping the destiny of life itself. The story of these massive eruptions, the poisonous skies, and their deadly impact continues to captivate scientists and historians of the Earth alike. They show the interaction of fire, gas, water, and life, showing how each element could increase the effects of the others in a catastrophic chain reaction. 252 million years ago, the Earth experienced one of its most extreme periods of volcanic activity, a time when volcanoes not only reshaped the land but turned the atmosphere into a deadly danger. The consequences were deep, extending beyond the immediate destruction to influence climate, ecosystems, and the very path of evolution for millions of years to come. The deadly combination of molten lava, acid rain, and poisonous gases transformed the Earth into a planet on the edge of ruin. Survival became a matter of adaptability and luck, and only those species capable of enduring the extreme conditions survived. The story of volcanoes and poisonous skies in the late Permian is a sharp reminder of the power of Earth's natural forces, a vivid illustration of how fire and gas can reshape a planet and challenge every form of life that calls it home. The late Permian volcanic eruptions were, in simple terms, global-scale experiments in environmental destruction. Their sheer size, length, and strength created conditions that would have been unimaginable to the creatures of that time. The Earth was a furnace of molten rock, a pot of acidic water, and an atmosphere thick with poison, all unfolding over a period of millions of years. Life struggled to survive, ecosystems collapsed, and only the most adaptable managed to endure the deadly combination of heat, gas, and fire. The volcanic activity that led to poisonous skies was not only a local disaster, but a planetary one. The gases released spread across the globe, affecting climates thousands of kilometers away from the eruption sites. Oceans became choking, lands were burned, and the air itself became a weapon of destruction. By studying the evidence left behind in rocks, fossils, and chemical traces, scientists can rebuild the terrifying reality of life under these deadly skies and understand the deep impact that volcanic activity can have on the entire planet. The Siberian traps, with their huge lava flows and continuous eruptions, show the scale of this catastrophe. Over millions of years, these eruptions released more carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases than had been released in any previous known period. The atmosphere became a deadly soup of heat-trapping gases and toxins, and the combined effects of global warming, acid rain, and poisonous air created an environment in which survival was the exception rather than the rule. The world was covered in fire, ash, and gas, and life was pushed to the edge of extinction. Volcanoes and poisonous skies of the late Permian are a serious reminder of the destructive potential of our planet. They show that even in times when life seemed abundant and thriving, the forces of nature could unleash events that would drastically alter the course of evolution. Lava, ash, and poisonous gases, released over very large areas and extended periods, transformed the Earth into a place of deadly beauty, where survival required extraordinary strength and adaptability. Fossils, rock layers, and chemical traces continue to tell this story today, offering a glimpse into one of the most dramatic and destructive chapters in the history of life on Earth. The late Permian volcanic eruptions left a legacy that is still clear in the geological record. The landscapes we see today, the layers of basalt and ash, and the traces of poisonous gases kept in sediments, all speak of a time when volcanoes reshaped the planet and poisoned the skies. These events were not just destructive, they were transformative, altering climates, oceans and ecosystems in ways that would echo for millions of years. The story of these eruptions and of the poisonous skies they created reminds us of the incredible power of natural forces and the fragile strength of life in the face of such overwhelming danger. The massive eruptions of the late Permian, which filled the skies with volcanic ash and deadly gases, represent one of the most extreme periods in Earth's history. Lava flowed over millions of square kilometers, ash blocked sunlight for months, oceans became acidic, and the air itself turned poisonous. The consequences were catastrophic, wiping out most marine species and many land creatures. Life that survived had to endure heat, poisonous air, acid rain, and a constantly changing environment. The Earth's atmosphere was transformed, the land was scarred, and the oceans were poisoned. The Siberian traps remain one of the most striking reminders of this period. They are a record of the power and persistence of volcanic activity, a sign of the ability of molten rock and poisonous gases to reshape the world on a planetary scale. The eruptions that created the traps released unimaginable amounts of carbon dioxide, sulfur dioxide, methane, and hydrogen sulfide, creating poisonous skies that made survival a constant struggle. 252 million years ago, the Earth was a place where fire and gas dominated the landscape, where ash darkened the skies, and where life faced one of its most serious tests. Rivers, lakes, and inland seas during the age of Pangia were far more than just features on the landscape. They were lifelines, veins of survival, and centres of change. Imagine a world where the land stretched as one enormous continent, the heart of which was often harsh, dry, and almost impossible to cross. In this immense landmass, water was a precious and rare gift. Every flowing river, every glimmering lake, and every inland sea became a magnet for life, a stage where the drama of survival, adaptation, and evolution unfolded over millions of years. The distribution of these water sources dictated not only where animals and plants could live, but also how they moved, interacted, and developed into the species we know today, or the ancestors of those species. The rivers of Pangia were not just long, twisting threads of water. Some were mighty and wide, cutting deep valleys into the earth as they carved their way across the supercontinent. Others were seasonal, swelling with torrential floods during the wet seasons and retreating to mere trickles or dry beds when the heat of summer took hold. For creatures of every size, these rivers were both a necessity and a challenge. Larger animals, such as the long-necked herbivorous reptiles that roamed the central lands, depended on them for drinking water and the vegetation they nurtured along the banks. Herds would follow the rivers, moving hundreds of kilometers over months and years, tracing the lifelines across deserts, plains, and forests. Without these flowing waters, migration would have been almost impossible in many regions, and the genetic diversity of species could have been severely limited. Smaller creatures were drawn to rivers for entirely different reasons. Amphibians, which relied on water for reproduction, could only thrive in places where rivers, ponds, or seasonal streams existed. Their eggs needed protection from desiccation, so even shallow pools left behind by receding rivers became critical breeding grounds. Insects too clustered near these water sources, not only for hydration, but also because the vegetation nourished by the rivers provided food and shelter. Over time, the presence of rivers allowed entire ecosystems to flourish, forming microhabitats within the vast, often hostile Pangian landscape. Lakes, whether permanent or temporary, were equally transformative. Some lakes stretched for hundreds of kilometers, nestled in basins formed by ancient tectonic movements or volcanic activity. Others appeared briefly, fed by seasonal rainfall or melting snow from highlands, only to vanish months later. These lakes were not just resting places, they became centers of evolution. Fish, amphibians, and early reptiles adapted to the varying sizes, depths, and salinity levels of lakes, giving rise to specialized species capable of surviving in conditions that would have been deadly elsewhere. Some lakes became highly saline as water evaporated under the relentless sun, leaving behind mineral-rich sediments. Species that survived in these lakes developed unique physiological traits, becoming hardy and resilient, ready to face the harsh deserts or rugged highlands surrounding them. Inland seas, although rarer than rivers or lakes, had a profound impact on life in Pangia. Unlike the vast oceans that surrounded the supercontinent, these seas were often shallow and partly enclosed, linking distant regions while still isolating the species within their waters. For migrating animals, inland seas acted as both barriers and guides. Herds might need to find ways around these large bodies of water, creating migration paths that shaped the distribution of species across continents. Meanwhile, the seas themselves nurtured aquatic life, forming unique marine ecosystems. Some inland seas were warm and teeming with life, supporting a variety of fish, mollusks, and early marine reptiles. Others were more marginal, sometimes brackish, sometimes seasonal, where only the hardiest organisms survived. The dynamic nature of these seas, constantly expanding or shrinking with climatic fluctuations, acted as a catalyst for evolution, forcing species to adapt quickly or perish. The scarcity and distribution of these water sources also dictated social behavior and population density. Herd animals would congregate around rivers and lakes, forming temporary communities. Predators followed these herds, learning to anticipate their movements along the predictable water routes. This led to the development of complex hunting strategies, territorial behaviors, and even early forms of social cooperation among species. Meanwhile, in aquatic habitats, competition for limited space and resources drove diversification. Fish species evolved different feeding mechanisms, body shapes, and reproductive strategies to exploit every niche within lakes and rivers. Amphibians and semi-aquatic reptiles similarly diversified, taking advantage of the interconnected water networks to spread across Pangia. The geological forces that shaped the rivers, lakes, and inland seas also had long-term consequences for migration and evolution. Tectonic shifts created basins that would eventually fill with water, forming lakes, while volcanic eruptions could dam rivers or create new channels. Climate played a critical role as well. In periods of heavy rainfall, rivers swelled and lakes expanded, connecting previously isolated populations of animals and plants. In dry periods, water receded, fragmenting populations and creating isolated pockets where species could evolve independently. This ebb and flow of water availability acted like a natural experiment in evolution, creating opportunities for adaptation, divergence, and the emergence of entirely new species. Even the sediment and nutrient deposits from rivers and lakes influenced the development of life on land. Floodplains along major rivers were often rich in minerals, supporting dense vegetation. These verdant corridors became corridors of life, where herbivores could feed, predators could hunt, and small animals could find shelter. The repeated flooding also dispersed seeds and spores far from their original locations, helping plants colonize new regions. Over millennia, this process contributed to the spread of forests, grasslands, and other plant communities across vast distances, linking ecosystems that might otherwise have remained isolated. In some cases, rivers and lakes acted as both highways and barriers. Aquatic species could travel along connected rivers, dispersing across Pangia and colonizing distant lakes and seas. However, geographic features like mountains, deserts, or tectonic rifts could interrupt these connections, isolating populations and allowing them to evolve independently. This isolation sometimes produced remarkable bursts of evolutionary innovation. For instance, species trapped in a shrinking lake might develop adaptations for higher salinity or lower oxygen levels, while those in a more stable river system could specialize in feeding techniques, swimming abilities, or reproductive strategies. The interaction between water availability and the extreme climate of Pangia further intensified evolutionary pressures. Central regions of the supercontinent were often arid and subjected to scorching heat during summer months, while the edges could experience cold winters. Rivers and lakes became oases in these extreme conditions, attracting life from surrounding areas. Animals and plants that relied on these water sources had to adapt to both the abundance of water and the scarcity that might follow in dry seasons. For migratory species, this created intricate timing patterns. Some would arrive just as seasonal rivers swelled, reproduce, and depart before the waters receded. Others would stay, developing adaptations to survive in fluctuating environments. The size and shape of water bodies also influenced the behavior of species. Large lakes and inland seas could moderate the climate of surrounding lands, creating pockets of humidity and cooler temperatures that supported richer vegetation. These areas became hubs of biodiversity, where species congregated, interacted, and competed. Smaller ponds and seasonal streams, by contrast, often forced species into rapid life cycles. Some amphibians hatched, matured, and reproduced in a matter of months, leaving behind the next generation before the water dried up. Fish in temporary pools evolved similar strategies, developing rapid growth rates and the ability to survive in oxygen-poor or increasingly saline conditions. Water sources also affected evolutionary arms races between predators and prey. Animals that lived near rivers and lakes learned to exploit the terrain and vegetation for hunting or hiding. Fish developed camouflage, speed, or schooling behaviors to escape predators. Reptiles evolved different limb structures for swimming or climbing along banks. Birds, which were beginning to emerge in the late stages of Pangia, relied heavily on water sources for feeding, nesting, and migration paths. In all these cases, the presence, absence, or characteristics of water determined who thrived and who vanished. In addition, rivers and lakes influenced plant evolution, which in turn shaped animal evolution. Plants near water had access to more consistent moisture, allowing them to grow larger, form dense forests, or produce abundant seeds and fruit. Herbivores adapted to feed on these plants, developing specialized teeth, digestive systems, and foraging behaviors. The distribution of water also influenced seed dispersal. Flooding rivers carried seeds for hundreds of kilometers, while animals that relied on water for drinking or feeding transported seeds in their fur, feathers, or digestive tracts. This constant movement of genetic material helped create interconnected ecosystems across vast distances, facilitating the spread of both plants and animals. Some inland seas also acted as evolutionary laboratories for aquatic reptiles. Shallow, warm waters were ideal for the development of early marine reptiles that would eventually dominate the oceans after the breakup of Pangia. These inland seas provided protected environments where species could experiment with swimming techniques, breathing adaptations, and hunting strategies. Over time, populations that thrived in these inland waters could expand into open seas or migrate along river systems, spreading their adaptations to new regions. The dynamics of water also shaped the survival strategies of the earliest terrestrial animals. Many creatures had to develop the ability to move between water sources during droughts, resulting in changes in limb structure, body size, and metabolism. Amphibians that could tolerate dry periods, reptiles that could conserve water, and insects that could enter dormancy all benefited from the patchy distribution of rivers and lakes. The presence of water created both opportunity and pressure, forcing species to innovate in ways that might never have occurred in a uniformly wet or dry world. Flooding events were particularly influential. When rivers overflowed, they reshaped the land, carving new channels, depositing nutrient-rich sediments, and sometimes destroying habitats. These floods could wipe out local populations, creating ecological vacancies that surviving species quickly filled. In this way, rivers acted as agents of both destruction and creation, continually cycling opportunities for adaptation and migration. Lakes and inland seas experienced similar cycles, expanding and contracting in response to rainfall and evaporation, constantly altering the living conditions of the organisms around them. Even the smallest streams played a role in shaping evolution. Temporary water flows could connect distant habitats for brief periods, allowing isolated species to exchange genes. Over thousands or millions of years, these small connections contributed to the genetic diversity of populations, increasing their resilience to environmental changes. Species that could take advantage of these fleeting water links were more likely to survive and spread across Pangia, while those that could not were confined to shrinking, isolated habitats, sometimes leading to extinction. The availability of water also influenced the timing of reproduction, migration, and growth. Animals adapted to predictable water patterns, hatching or giving birth just as rivers swelled or lakes expanded. Plants timed seed germination to rainfall patterns influenced by nearby rivers and lakes. In some cases, species developed storage mechanisms, such as seeds that could remain dormant during dry periods or fat reserves in animals, allowing them to endure long stretches between water sources. Over millions of years, the shifting locations and sizes of rivers, lakes, and inland seas left permanent marks on the evolutionary history of Pangia. Areas that were consistently rich in water became cradles of biodiversity, where many lineages originated and diversified. Regions where water was scarce acted as evolutionary pressure cookers, where species developed extreme adaptations to survive. Migration paths carved by rivers and lakes shaped the distribution of species across the supercontinent, creating patterns that can still be traced in the fossil record today. Even the chemistry of water played a role. Some rivers carried minerals from volcanic soils, nourishing plants and animals in ways that fresh water alone could not. Others were acidic or contained high levels of dissolved salts, forcing species to evolve tolerance or specialized feeding strategies. In certain inland seas, the concentration of minerals and salts became so high during dry periods that only a handful of species survived, creating isolated pockets of evolution where dramatic changes could occur over relatively short geological timescales. The interconnectedness of rivers, lakes, and inland seas created a web of life across Pangia. Animals could travel along these waterways, plants could spread across floodplains, and predators could follow prey across hundreds of kilometers. Water was not just a resource, it was a guide, a highway, and a catalyst for life. Evolution, migration, and survival were all tightly linked to its presence and scarcity. In essence, the rare water sources of Pangia shaped the very paths that life could take, influencing which species survived, where they lived, and how they changed over millions of years. The constant tension between abundance and scarcity of water drove innovation in behavior, physiology, and ecology. Animals that could exploit seasonal rivers, survive in shrinking lakes, or navigate across arid landscapes had a distinct advantage. Plants that could colonize floodplains, survive in saline lake margins, or spread seeds via waterways thrived and formed the foundation of entire ecosystems. Over millions of years, these patterns repeated, amplified, and shifted with the climate, tectonics, and volcanic activity of Pangia, producing a rich tapestry of life shaped by the simple yet profound presence of water. In this way, rivers, lakes, and inland seas were more than just geographical features. They were architects of evolution, directors of migration, and keepers of survival in a world that was often unforgiving, vast, and extreme. They connected life across enormous distances, forced adaptation in the face of scarcity, and created pockets of opportunity that allowed both animals and plants to flourish, evolve, and spread across the sprawling supercontinent of Pangia. Life, in every form, was inextricably linked to these precious rare water sources, and their influence resonates through the evolutionary history we can observe today. Rivers that once flowed for hundreds of kilometers, lakes that shimmered in the sun before vanishing, and inland seas that teemed with life all tell stories of survival, adaptation, and relentless change. They remind us that in a world where water was not guaranteed, every drop mattered, and the creatures that mastered its rhythms were the ones that wrote their names into the long story of a life on Earth. Life's dance with rivers, lakes, and inland seas created paths that shaped the destiny of species, guiding migrations, influencing interactions, and creating endless opportunities for evolution, all under the unforgiving sun and ever-changing climate of the Pangian world. Water, rare and precious, became the silent architect of life. It shaped the distribution of species, guided migration across thousands of kilometers, and forced adaptation in ways that no other factor could match. From the tiniest amphibian clinging to a seasonal stream to the largest herbivore following a mighty river, every living thing was bound to water's presence, movement, and rhythm. These rivers, lakes, and inland seas were not passive features. They were active players in the unfolding drama of life, pushing evolution forward, challenging survival, and connecting the diverse landscapes of the supercontinent. Even in areas where rivers were few and lakes were isolated, life found ways to endure. Some species adapted to burrow into moist soil near intermittent water sources. Others evolved the ability to travel long distances between lakes, or survive in temporary pools left behind after floods. These adaptations often led to unique species found only in specific regions, highlighting how the scarcity and distribution of water drove diversification. Inland seas also played a role in climatic regulation, influencing rainfall patterns, temperature, and humidity in surrounding areas. This, in turn, affected plant growth, which directly impacted herbivorous animals and the predators that relied on them. The interconnectedness of water, climate, and life created a dynamic system where rivers, lakes, and seas were at the center of ecological and evolutionary processes. Over time, species learned to predict water availability, time reproduction cycles, and migrate efficiently, refining behaviors that would carry into later geological periods. Life around water was never static. Seasonal changes, floods, droughts, and shifting inland seas continuously altered habitats, creating a world in flux. Species that could move, adapt, and exploit these changing conditions thrived. Some amphibians and reptiles evolved mechanisms to survive dry periods, such as dormant eggs, or the ability to estivate, while plants developed seeds capable of lying dormant for months or even years until favorable conditions returned. These strategies reflected the profound influence of water scarcity and availability, highlighting how every drop dictated life's opportunities and limitations. Even today, traces of these ancient rivers, lakes, and inland seas remain in the fossil record, offering glimpses of how water shaped life during Pangia. Fossilized riverbeds, lake sediments, and marine deposits reveal migration patterns, population distributions, and evolutionary experiments. They show how species responded to changing water conditions, adapted to isolated habitats, and took advantage of rare resources to survive and flourish. Through these remnants, scientists can reconstruct the intricate web of life that once thrived around Pangia's precious water sources, illustrating how vital rivers, lakes, and inland seas were to the story of life on Earth. The influence of these water sources extended beyond immediate survival. They were catalysts for evolutionary innovation. Life forms that encountered new challenges along rivers or in shrinking lakes often developed traits that gave them advantages in other environments as well. Aquatic adaptations sometimes paved the way for terrestrial expansion, while behaviors learned in response to fluctuating water availability prepared species to survive in harsh deserts or highlands. In this way, the rare and shifting waters of Pangia not only dictated where life could exist, but also shaped how it could evolve, creating the incredible diversity that characterized the supercontinent. Rivers, lakes, and inland seas, in their abundance or scarcity, carved the paths of migration, molded the pressures of evolution, and orchestrated the movements of countless species across Pangia. They created hubs of life, refuges of survival, and arenas of competition and adaptation. In a world where the heart of the supercontinent was often harsh, where the sun scorched the land and seasons could swing between extremes, water was the most valuable resource. Every creature, from the smallest insect to the largest reptile, had its fate tied to the presence or absence of these lifelines. And the story of life on Pangia is inseparable from the story of its rivers, lakes, and inland seas. The rivers that twisted across plains, the lakes that shimmered in basins, and the inland seas that spread across lowlands were more than geographical features. They were the engines of migration, evolution, and survival. Life on Pangia followed these waters, adapted to their rhythms, and evolved under their influence. These rare and precious water sources dictated not just where creatures could live, but how they interacted, how they moved, and how they changed over time. They shaped the very patterns of life, creating pathways, isolating populations, and setting the stage for the rich tapestry of evolution that unfolded across the supercontinent for millions of years. Water, in all its forms, remained the silent yet powerful guide of life. Its presence inspired migration, moulded behaviour, and pressured species to adapt or perish. Rivers carved valleys that became highways for herds and corridors for plants. Lakes formed cradles of aquatic and semi-aquatic life, while inland seas created opportunities for experimentation and innovation in evolution. Even the smallest streams and temporary pools played roles in connecting or isolating populations, driving diversification. Through every flood, drought, and seasonal change, water dictated the terms of survival and evolution, leaving a legacy that continues to inform our understanding of life on Earth, echoing across hundreds of millions of years. The Earth, near the end of the Permian period, roughly around 252 million years ago, was a place of extraordinary upheaval and dramatic transformation. Life, which had flourished in oceans, on land, and in the skies for hundreds of millions of years, suddenly faced a crisis of unimaginable scale. This was not a small or isolated event, but a planetary catastrophe that reshaped the course of evolution and altered the very fabric of life on Earth. Known today as the Great Permian Extinction, it is often called the mother of all extinctions, because it wiped out an estimated 90% of marine species and 75% of terrestrial species, leaving the planet in a state of near-total desolation. The causes of this mass extinction were not simple, and they were not caused by a single event. Rather, they were the result of a complex interplay of climate shifts, volcanic activity, changes in ocean chemistry, and the gradual breakdown of ecosystems that had existed for millions of years. Volcanic activity played a central role in this disaster, and the eruptions that occurred during this time were unlike anything we witness today. The largest of these eruptions took place in what is now Siberia, in a region called the Siberian Traps. These eruptions were monumental, covering an area of more than 2 million square kilometres with lava, ash, and gases. To put this in perspective, the area affected was larger than the entirety of modern India. Lava poured out continuously over thousands of years, forming layers upon layers of volcanic rock that would eventually solidify into one of the largest volcanic provinces ever recorded in Earth's history. These eruptions released enormous quantities of carbon dioxide, sulfur dioxide, and other toxic gases into the atmosphere. Carbon dioxide, a greenhouse gas, trapped heat in the atmosphere and caused global temperatures to rise sharply. Sulfur dioxide, on the other hand, formed acid rain, which fell upon the land and poisoned soils, rivers, and lakes. The combination of these gases made the atmosphere not only hotter, but also more corrosive and deadly for many forms of life. The effect of these volcanic eruptions was compounded by the position of the supercontinent Pangia, which existed at that time. With almost all the land masses joined together, the interior regions of Pangia were far from the moderating influence of the oceans. This meant that any warming or cooling of the atmosphere was amplified over the vast central regions of the continent. Summers became scorching, and winters could be extremely harsh. Seasonal changes were extreme, and the land in the interior regions often became arid and hostile. As the volcanoes pumped carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, global temperatures soared, and the deserts of Pangia expanded even further, leaving many species without suitable habitats. Organisms that had thrived in stable climates found themselves suddenly exposed to extreme heat, drought, and scarcity of resources. Oceans, too, were deeply affected by these changes. As volcanic gases entered the atmosphere, some of them eventually dissolved into the seas. Carbon dioxide, when absorbed by seawater, reacts to form carbonic acid, which lowers the pH of the water and makes it more acidic. Acidic oceans are deadly to many marine organisms, particularly those with shells or skeletons made of calcium carbonate, such as corals, brachiopods, and certain types of plankton. These creatures struggled to form their protective shells, and many species could not survive under the rapidly changing conditions. At the same time, the warming of the oceans reduced oxygen levels in the water. Warmer water holds less oxygen, and combined with the overgrowth of certain microorganisms such as bacteria and algae, vast areas of the seas became hypoxic, meaning oxygen depleted. Marine life that relied on well-oxygenated water began to die off in enormous numbers, creating a cascading effect throughout the food chain. Predators lost their prey, scavengers found nothing to consume, and entire ecosystems collapsed. The land was no less affected than the oceans. Plants, which form the base of terrestrial ecosystems, suffered greatly from the combination of heat, drought, and acid rain. Forests burned in some regions, while in others, plant life simply withered under prolonged drought. The loss of vegetation had direct consequences for herbivorous animals, which found their food sources disappearing. As herbivores struggled to survive, carnivorous species lost their prey, leading to widespread starvation. The breakdown of plant life also disrupted the soil, causing erosion and the collapse of previously stable landscapes. Rivers that had once supported lush habitats dried up or became toxic from dissolved volcanic chemicals. Lakes shrank or disappeared entirely, depriving freshwater species of their only refuges. Climate shifts during this time were not limited to heat alone. Some evidence suggests that the Earth experienced extreme swings in temperature, with periods of intense warming followed by sudden cooling events. These fluctuations further stressed ecosystems, as species adapted to one set of conditions could not survive the abrupt changes. The atmosphere may have contained high levels of methane, another potent greenhouse gas, which would have triggered rapid warming episodes. Methane can be released from frozen deposits called clathrates on the ocean floor when the water warms. Once released, methane accelerates warming even more, creating a vicious cycle that was difficult for life to endure. Another critical factor in the mass extinction was the role of microbial life. Certain microorganisms, particularly bacteria that thrive in low-oxygen environments, proliferated in the oceans as oxygen levels dropped. Some of these bacteria produced toxic substances such as hydrogen sulfide, which could poison both marine and terrestrial life. Hydrogen sulfide is a powerful neurotoxin and can disrupt respiration in animals and humans alike. It is also highly flammable, and in some scenarios it may have reached the atmosphere in sufficient quantities to harm land-dwelling organisms. The combination of heat, acid rain, low oxygen, and toxic gases created an almost uninhabitable planet for many species, leading to a chain reaction of extinctions that affected nearly all forms of life. Fossil records from this period reveal the staggering scale of the die-offs. In the oceans, groups of organisms that had thrived for hundreds of millions of years suddenly disappeared. Trilobites, a diverse group of marine arthropods that had existed for over 270 million years, vanished completely. Many types of brachiopods, mollusks, and corals were wiped out, leaving only a fraction of species behind. On land, large groups of amphibians, reptiles, and early mammal-like creatures also faced catastrophic losses. Some lineages survived, but they were often reduced to small, isolated populations, making recovery slow and difficult. The timing of these events, according to geological evidence, suggests that the mass extinction did not happen overnight, but over tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of years. While this may seem slow from a human perspective, it is extremely rapid in geological terms. The eruptions of the Siberian traps alone spanned approximately 1 million years, releasing gases continuously and maintaining a hostile climate for extended periods. Multiple waves of extinction occurred, with species succumbing at different times depending on their sensitivity to heat, oxygen depletion, or chemical changes in their environment. This prolonged stress prevented ecosystems from recovering between events, ensuring that the extinction remained extensive and devastating. The aftermath of the Great Permian extinction was a world that appeared almost lifeless. Vast regions of the oceans were empty of life, and terrestrial landscapes were barren deserts or scorched plains. Many ecological niches were left vacant, setting the stage for the rise of new species once conditions eventually stabilized. While some forms of life managed to survive, the genetic diversity of ecosystems had been severely reduced. Evolution, which normally occurs gradually, was forced to accelerate as species adapted to the new, harsher conditions. The surviving organisms often developed new traits, altered diets, or changed behaviors to cope with the challenges of the post-extinction world. In examining the causes of this mass extinction, scientists have also considered the role of feedback loops. For example, as plants died and forests burned, less carbon dioxide was absorbed from the atmosphere, amplifying warming. As oceans became acidic and oxygen depleted, marine die-offs released even more carbon into the atmosphere, further enhancing greenhouse effects. Each catastrophic event made subsequent events more severe, creating a self-reinforcing cycle of environmental degradation. The interconnection between volcanic activity, climate change, ocean chemistry, and biological collapse illustrates how a single chain of events can ripple across the entire planet, affecting every corner of life. The fossilized remnants of this period, such as petrified forests, layers of volcanic rock, and mass graves of marine animals, provide a vivid record of the catastrophe. Scientists study these remains to understand the sequence of events, the speed of extinction, and the factors that allowed some species to survive while others vanished. For example, certain hardy plants and animals that could tolerate heat, drought, or low oxygen levels managed to endure, acting as the ancestors of life forms that would dominate later geological periods. These survivors played a crucial role in rebuilding ecosystems and eventually paving the way for the rise of the dinosaurs and other groups that would come to prominence in the Triassic period. Geological evidence from around the world points to simultaneous events rather than isolated occurrences. Sedimentary layers from this period show signs of widespread volcanic ash, changes in chemical composition, and deposits indicating low oxygen conditions. Fossils of surviving species often appear in scattered pockets, suggesting that some regions acted as refuges where life could temporarily endure. The study of these refuges helps scientists understand how life can persist in the face of near-total collapse and how ecosystems gradually recover after extreme environmental stress. In addition to volcanic activity and climate shifts, some researchers have explored the potential role of asteroid or comet impacts. While evidence for a massive impact at this exact time is not as clear as it is for the later extinction at the end of the Cretaceous period, it remains possible that smaller impacts contributed to environmental instability. Even minor collisions could have triggered additional fires, tsunamis, or temporary climate disturbances, adding further stress to already struggling ecosystems. The combination of these forces — colossal volcanic eruptions, rising global temperatures, toxic gases, acidified oceans, oxygen depletion, extreme seasonal changes, microbial proliferation, and possible asteroid impacts — created a perfect storm that few species could survive. Unlike smaller extinction events which may have been limited to specific regions or groups of organisms, the end Permian extinction was global, touching every ocean, continent, and habitat on Earth. It serves as a stark reminder of the fragility of life in the face of overwhelming environmental change. The study of the Permian extinction also provides insights into how modern ecosystems might respond to rapid climate change. Today, humans are contributing to rising temperatures, ocean acidification, and habitat destruction, creating conditions that, in some ways, echo the crises of 252 million years ago. By understanding how past life forms were affected by extreme environmental stress, scientists gain a better sense of which species or ecosystems are most vulnerable and how recovery processes may unfold. The fossil record acts as both a warning and a guide, showing the potential consequences of sustained ecological disruption and the long timescales required for recovery. In summary, the mass extinctions near the end of the Permian era were the result of a complex combination of volcanic activity, climate shifts, chemical changes in the oceans, and ecological collapse. The Siberian Traps eruptions released massive quantities of gases that heated the planet, poisoned the air and water, and caused acid rain. Extreme seasonal changes, the expansion of deserts, and fluctuations in temperature created a hostile environment on land, while oceans became acidic and oxygen-poor, leading to massive die-offs of marine species. Feedback loops and prolonged stress prevented ecosystems from recovering, and the combined impact of these factors led to the loss of nearly all marine life and the majority of terrestrial species. Fossil evidence, chemical analyses, and sedimentary records all tell the story of this unparalleled catastrophe, providing a detailed glimpse into the most severe extinction event in Earth's history, and demonstrating how interconnected and fragile life can be in the face of rapid and extreme environmental changes. The survivors of this catastrophe were few but resilient. They formed the foundation for life in the following Triassic period, carrying with them the genetic potential to evolve into new forms and eventually repopulate the devastated landscapes. The lessons from this event highlight how environmental changes, whether gradual or sudden, can reshape the biosphere and influence the trajectory of evolution for millions of years. The end Permian mass extinction is a dramatic testament to the power of natural forces, the vulnerability of life, and the enduring capacity for survival and renewal. This cataclysm serves as one of the clearest examples of how planetary-scale events, particularly those involving the atmosphere, oceans, and volcanic activity, can lead to mass die-offs and shape the evolutionary path of life on Earth. Every fossil, every layer of rock, and every trace of ash tells a part of this story, painting a picture of a world in chaos where only the hardiest forms of life could endure. In the end, the mass extinctions near the close of the Permian period remind us that the history of life is a story of constant change, resilience, and adaptation, driven by forces both magnificent and terrifying. The devastation wrought by these events was so complete that it would take millions of years for ecosystems to recover fully. Shallow marine habitats, once bustling with life, became deserts of stone and sand, while terrestrial landscapes that had supported lush forests and diverse fauna were reduced to barren plains. The re-establishment of complex food webs was slow, and new forms of life emerged gradually, shaped by the lingering effects of climate instability and environmental stress. The survivors adapted to niches left vacant by extinct species, setting the stage for the eventual rise of dinosaurs, mammals, and countless other groups that would define life on Earth in the subsequent eras. The end-Permian extinction stands as a singularly dramatic illustration of the interconnectedness of Earth's systems. Volcanism, climate, atmospheric chemistry, ocean chemistry, and life itself all interacted in ways that magnified the destructive effects of each individual factor. In this global drama, no species, no ecosystem, and no region of the Earth was entirely safe. The result was a near-total reset of the biosphere, demonstrating both the vulnerability of life to environmental catastrophe and the long, patient process of recovery that follows. The fossil record, preserved in layers of sediment and volcanic ash, allows scientists to reconstruct the sequence of events with remarkable detail. Patterns of extinction, survival, and recovery provide a window into the dynamics of ancient ecosystems, revealing how certain traits, such as heat tolerance, drought resistance, and metabolic flexibility, could determine survival. Modern research, including isotopic analysis of carbon and oxygen in fossilized shells, helps to trace changes in temperature, ocean acidity, and atmospheric composition, giving a clearer picture of the environmental pressures that drove this mass extinction. From these studies, it is evident that the end-Permian extinction was not merely an isolated natural disaster, but a prolonged, multifaceted crisis affecting all forms of life. The combination of extreme volcanic activity, climate shifts, chemical changes in oceans and atmosphere, and ecological collapse created a deadly environment in which few species could survive. Life that persisted was forced to adapt in extraordinary ways, leading to the evolution of new forms and the eventual repopulation of the planet. The legacy of this event is seen not only in the fossil record, but also in the evolutionary paths that followed, shaping the diversity of life that we know today. The massive die-offs of the Permian period were also characterized by unusual and extreme phenomena in both the seas and on land. In the oceans, anoxia, or the complete absence of oxygen, became widespread. Microbial blooms further depleted oxygen and released toxins that poisoned marine life. On land, heat stress, prolonged droughts, and acid rain caused widespread mortality among plants and animals. The interconnectedness of these events meant that failures in one part of an ecosystem could trigger cascading extinctions across multiple levels of the food chain. The long-term consequences of the Permian extinction were profound. The survivors often evolved rapidly to fill vacant ecological niches, giving rise to new lineages and forms of life. Recovered ecosystems were initially simpler than those before the extinction, with fewer species and less complexity, but over millions of years diversity gradually returned. This slow rebound illustrates both the fragility and resilience of life, demonstrating that even after near total devastation, evolution finds a way to adapt and continue. The Great Permian Extinction remains one of the most studied events in Earth's history because of its scale, severity, and the insights it provides into the relationship between life and the environment. Volcanic activity, climate change, ocean chemistry, and ecological collapse all played roles in shaping the outcome. Fossil evidence, sediment layers, and geochemical signatures collectively reveal the extraordinary series of events that led to one of the most dramatic die-offs in the history of life. Scientists continue to examine this period to better understand the dynamics of mass extinctions, the vulnerability of ecosystems, and the processes that allow life to recover and thrive after catastrophic events. The end-Permian mass extinction, with its combination of fiery eruptions, suffocating heat, toxic gases, acidified oceans, collapsing food chains, and ecological breakdown, remains a stark testament to the power of natural forces. It is a vivid example of how life on Earth, no matter how resilient, can be pushed to the brink by extreme environmental stress. The survivors of this catastrophe laid the foundations for the ecosystems of the Triassic period, demonstrating that even in the face of overwhelming destruction, life finds a way to persist and evolve. By examining the evidence left behind, from the layers of volcanic rock to the fossilized remains of vanished species, scientists can piece together the story of this ancient catastrophe. The interactions between the atmosphere, oceans, land, and living organisms created a perfect storm of environmental pressures that few species could withstand. Those that survived were shaped by these pressures, carrying forward the genetic legacy of adaptation and resilience. In this way, the mass extinctions near the end of the Permian era serve as both a warning and a lesson, illustrating the profound influence of environmental change on the fate of life. The magnitude of the extinction highlights the delicate balance that exists within Earth's ecosystems. When that balance is disrupted by massive volcanic eruptions, climate shifts, or other catastrophic events, the consequences can be swift and widespread. Life that had evolved over hundreds of millions of years was nearly wiped out in a few thousand to 100,000 years. The survivors, often small, hardy species, were forced to adapt quickly, demonstrating the remarkable capacity of life to endure extreme challenges. Fossil evidence continues to reveal new insights into how these extinctions unfolded. In marine deposits, sudden disappearances of entire species indicate rapid environmental deterioration. On land, fossilized plant and animal remains show signs of stress, such as stunted growth, disease, or malformation, further illustrating the severity of the crisis. By studying these patterns, scientists gain a deeper understanding of the factors that lead to mass extinctions, the variability of survival strategies, and the long-term consequences for global biodiversity. The end Permian extinction illustrates the profound interconnectedness of Earth's systems. Volcanic eruptions released gases that altered climate, ocean chemistry, and atmospheric conditions. Rising temperatures and changing precipitation patterns stressed terrestrial ecosystems. Acidic and oxygen-poor oceans disrupted marine life. Feedback loops amplified these effects, and the combined pressures led to near-total collapse of global ecosystems. The survivors, however, carried the seeds of renewal, gradually giving rise to new ecosystems and evolutionary lineages that would populate the planet for millions of years to come. The edges of Pangia were places of wonder and struggle, where the land met the vast waters that stretched endlessly in every direction. These coastal zones were not simple lines where water lapped against Earth. They were bustling, dynamic environments filled with life, energy, and constant change. The continents that formed Pangia were enormous, creating long stretches of coastlines that faced both shallow seas and deep oceanic expanses. Along these coasts, life had adapted to the interplay of land and water, to the rise and fall of tides, and to the shifting patterns of climate that could vary widely from one region to another. Shallow seas spread over large parts of what are now known as North America, Europe, Africa, and Asia, creating extensive continental shelves where sunlight penetrated easily into the waters, allowing a profusion of plants and animals to thrive. The shallow coastal waters were rich with nutrients, delivered by rivers from inland areas, and these nutrients supported enormous blooms of microscopic algae, which in turn fed countless tiny animals, forming the foundation of a complex and diverse food web. Coral-like structures, built by ancient organisms that were distant relatives of today's corals, formed reefs that jutted into the water, providing shelter, hiding places, and breeding grounds for countless species. These early reefs were home to an astonishing variety of invertebrates, including brachiopods, trilobites, and mollusks. Each wave that washed over these reefs carried life-giving nutrients, oxygen, and microscopic plankton, sustaining the delicate balance of these coastal ecosystems. The shallow waters near Pangia's coasts were alive with motion, not just from the tides, but from the constant activity of the creatures that inhabited them. Small fish darted through the reefs, avoiding predators while feeding on tiny animals and plants. Shelled creatures crawled along the sandy and muddy bottoms, leaving tracks that would fossilize millions of years later, providing a glimpse into life on these ancient shores. Some of the shallow coastal zones contained estuaries, where rivers emptied into the sea. These estuaries were particularly rich environments, where fresh water mixed with salt water to create conditions ideal for feeding and reproduction. Fish and invertebrates would congregate in these areas, while birds and other flying creatures, if they had already evolved along some coastal margins, would hunt in the abundant shallows. The estuarine waters acted as nurseries for many species, where young animals could grow in relative safety before venturing into the open ocean. Moving away from the immediate coasts, the continental shelves extended outward, gradually giving way to deeper waters. These shelves were often home to vast fields of kelp-like plants and algae, which thrived in the sunlit waters and formed dense underwater forests. These forests were crucial, offering both food and shelter to a variety of animals, from early fish to massive invertebrates. The animals of these shelves were remarkably diverse. Shelled creatures, some smaller than a fingernail and others as large as a dinner plate, grazed on algae or filtered tiny plankton from the water. Fish and early relatives of sharks swam in schools, hunting in packs, or hiding among the vegetation to ambush prey. The presence of predators created a constant pressure, driving adaptations such as speed, camouflage, and defensive shells. Life on these shelves was an intricate dance of survival, competition, and cooperation, with each species playing a role in the large ecosystem. The deeper waters beyond the shelves presented a very different environment. Sunlight faded quickly, and the waters became colder and darker. In these zones, giant predators lurked, adapted to life where light was scarce, and food could be hard to find. Squid-like creatures propelled themselves through the dark waters with remarkable speed, while ancient relatives of sharks hunted in silent ambush. Many of these deep-water predators had specialized senses, able to detect the faintest movements or electrical signals in the water to locate prey. While less visible than the bustling shallows, these deep zones were no less important, forming a vast network that connected the coastal and marine ecosystems of Pangia. Migratory animals moved between shallow and deep waters, linking different parts of the ocean and helping to circulate nutrients and energy across the system. Along the edges of Pangia, the coasts themselves were shaped not only by the water but by the winds and climate of the time. In some regions, tropical heat dominated, causing the waters to be warm and the sunlight to penetrate deeply, fostering growth of algae and reef-building organisms. In other regions, near what is now the polar zones, colder currents and ice-influenced waters brought nutrients from distant regions, feeding rich fisheries and supporting unique communities of cold-adapted animals. Seasonal variations, such as changes in temperature and storms, could drive migrations and breeding cycles, influencing the rhythms of life along these ancient shores. Storms swept across the coasts with great power, reshaping sandbars and dunes, uprooting plants and displacing creatures, but also stirring nutrients from the seabed and revitalizing the food supply. The ever-changing interface between land and sea made coastal areas unpredictable yet full of life, forcing species to adapt continually or perish. The intertidal zones of Pangia's coasts, areas exposed at low tide and submerged at high tide, were places of extreme challenge and opportunity. These zones required creatures to withstand changing temperatures, salinity, and moisture levels on a daily basis. Early mollusks and arthropods were particularly successful in these regions, evolving protective shells, strong attachments to rocks, and ways to close off their bodies during dry periods. These creatures often formed dense colonies, creating microhabitats where other animals could hide and feed. Tiny crustaceans scuttled across rocks and sand, feeding on algae or detritus, while burrowing worms enriched the sediments and helped recycle nutrients. Seaweeds and other plants clung to the rocks and sandy bottoms, anchoring themselves firmly to withstand waves, while also providing food and shelter to the myriad animals that sought refuge among their fronds. The rivers that flowed into these coastal zones were lifelines, carrying sediments, minerals, and organic matter from the interior of Pangia to the oceans. These rivers created deltas, estuaries, and shallow bays that were extraordinarily fertile. The mixing of fresh and salt water created gradients of salinity, temperature, and nutrient availability, giving rise to different niches where specialized species could thrive. Some fish were adapted to live in the brackish water of the estuaries, moving between fresh and salt water at different stages of life, while others remained near the coast, relying on the productivity of the shallow seas. The constant input of sediment shaped the coastline over time, creating new habitats and sometimes burying old ones, forcing life to continuously adapt to the shifting environment. Within the open oceans that surrounded Pangia, life was just as varied and complex. the waters were teeming with plankton, the tiny drifting organisms that formed the base of the marine food web. These plankton included both plant-like organisms that photosynthesized sunlight and animal-like organisms that fed on the plants or on each other. In turn, these plankton fed small fish, which were eaten by larger fish, cephalopods, and early marine reptiles. The predator-prey relationships in the open ocean drove the evolution of speed, agility, and sensory perception, with each species adapting in response to others. Schools of fish moved in synchrony, a living fluid that could confuse predators, while larger creatures patrolled alone or in pairs, seeking the weak or injured. Floating vegetation, such as mats of algae, offered both shelter and hunting grounds. Small invertebrates hid among the strands of algae, feeding and reproducing safely away from predators, while fish and other animals hovered nearby to exploit the abundant food. Even in the open ocean, where the waters seemed vast and empty, life found ways to cluster, to feed efficiently, and to survive. Many species had developed strategies to cope with scarcity, storing energy, migrating over long distances, or hunting at night when others were less active. Marine reptiles were among the most spectacular creatures of these waters. Early relatives of ichthyosaurs, plesiosaurs, and other long-necked swimmers moved gracefully through the oceans, hunting fish, squid, and other prey. Their bodies were adapted to life in water, with fins for steering, streamlined shapes for speed, and strong jaws to catch and hold slippery prey. These reptiles were both predators and competitors, influencing the distribution and behavior of fish and other marine creatures. Their presence added a layer of complexity to the food webs, as smaller predators had to avoid them while hunting their own prey. The seas were also places of reproduction and growth. Many species laid eggs in safe zones along reefs or shallow waters, ensuring that the next generation had access to food and protection. Larval stages of fish, mollusks, and other invertebrates often drifted with the currents, spreading life to new regions and connecting distant parts of the oceans. These drifting larvae were at the mercy of the tides and winds, yet they played a crucial role in maintaining genetic diversity and colonizing new habitats. At the same time, deep ocean trenches and underwater mountains shaped marine life in dramatic ways. These features affected currents, temperature, and nutrient distribution, creating hotspots of biodiversity. Cold, nutrient-rich upwellings from the deep supported plankton blooms near the surface, drawing in schools of fish and their predators. The underwater landscape created natural barriers and corridors, guiding migrations and influencing where species could thrive. Life in the oceans was not random. It was a carefully balanced system shaped by the contours of the seafloor, the chemistry of the waters, and the interactions between countless species. The coastal ecosystems and marine environments of Pangia were not isolated from the land. Storms, volcanic eruptions, and shifting tectonic plates could suddenly alter the coastline or the composition of the waters. Lava flows from volcanic eruptions occasionally reached the seas, warming localized areas and adding minerals that stimulated life. Sediment from rivers, enriched with nutrients from decayed plants and animals, created fertile zones where plankton thrived, cascading energy upward through the food web. Even the occasional asteroid impact, which might have caused massive waves and disruption, played a role in shaping the ecological balance. Some regions of the coasts were dominated by sandy beaches and dunes, where the constant movement of sand created unstable habitats. Despite the challenges, life found ways to endure. Burrowing creatures escaped the shifting sands, while mobile predators hunted in the shallows. In other areas, rocky cliffs and ledges provided firm surfaces for attachment, offering stability for organisms that could cling to life in the face of crashing waves. Tide pools formed in depressions on rocks, serving as miniature ecosystems where small fish, crustaceans, and algae lived in tightly knit communities, surviving on what the ocean brought in with each ebb and flow. The interaction between different species was intense and often dramatic. Predators hunted constantly, while prey evolved new ways to avoid them. Shells thickened, spines developed, and camouflage became more sophisticated. Plants and algae adapted to sunlight, water flow, and grazing pressures, sometimes forming dense thickets or tall underwater forests that could sway with the currents yet remain rooted. Life along Pangia's coasts and in its surrounding oceans was a continuous story of struggle, adaptation, and survival. A vivid, ever-changing tapestry that reflected the dynamic forces shaping the Earth itself. Even the smallest creatures played vital roles. Tiny planktonic organisms controlled the flow of energy through the ecosystem. Worms and burrowing animals aerated the sediment, recycling nutrients and maintaining the health of the seabed. Filter feeders removed particulate matter from the water, keeping it clear and supporting the growth of photosynthetic organisms. Each species, no matter how small, contributed to the resilience and complexity of the ecosystem, showing how interconnected the coastal and marine worlds truly were. Storms, tides, and seasonal changes were not just challenges, they were mechanisms that maintained ecological balance. Nutrients carried from the land into the sea by rivers, and rainfall fed plankton blooms, which in turn supported the larger creatures. Tides reshaped the intertidal zones daily, preventing any one species from becoming dominant and allowing a diversity of life to coexist. Seasonal variations in temperature and currents triggered migrations, breeding cycles, and shifts in predator-prey relationships, adding rhythm and flow to the ecosystem. Over millions of years, the coastline of Pangia shifted repeatedly. Rising and falling sea levels, caused by changes in climate and the growth of glaciers, altered habitats and forced species to adapt or move. Erosion from wind and water constantly reshaped the land, creating new beaches, cliffs, and estuaries. Volcanic activity added new land and minerals, sometimes destroying existing habitats, but also creating opportunities for colonization. Life responded to these changes with astonishing resilience, evolving new forms, spreading to new areas, and sometimes disappearing entirely, leaving fossils as testimony to the ancient drama. The vast oceans surrounding Pangia were not uniform. Warm tropical waters near the equator supported dense, diverse communities of organisms, while cooler temperate and polar waters hosted species adapted to lower temperatures and seasonal variability. Currents transported nutrients, larvae, and plankton across great distances, connecting distant ecosystems and allowing species to disperse and colonize new regions. Ocean gyres and upwellings created localized areas of abundance, while deeper zones remained sparsely populated yet were critical as refugees and migration corridors. The interaction between coastal and marine ecosystems was constant. Estuaries and deltas connected rivers with the sea, allowing freshwater species to enter the marine world and vice versa. Predators from the oceans hunted near the coasts, while coastal species sometimes ventured into the open waters in search of food or breeding grounds. This connectivity meant that no ecosystem existed in isolation. All were part of a larger dynamic system shaped by currents, climate, tides, and the complex dance of life. The shores and seas of Pangia were places of remarkable diversity, from microscopic plankton to massive marine reptiles. Every creature had its role, whether as predator, prey, scavenger, or recycler. The ecosystems were resilient, yet constantly tested by environmental changes, storms, volcanic activity, and shifting sea levels. They were also creative, generating endless forms, colours, and behaviours that allowed life to flourish in ways both subtle and spectacular. Even the barren stretches of coastline held the potential for life, with seeds, larvae, and spores waiting for the right conditions to grow and spread. The coasts of Pangia were never still. Waves crashed, winds blew, and tides ebbed and flowed, shaping beaches, estuaries, and cliffs. Rivers carved valleys and deltas, carrying nutrients to the sea. Volcanic activity, earthquakes, and shifting plates reshaped the shoreline over thousands and millions of years. Life along these edges adapted, survived, and thrived in response to these forces, displaying a resilience and ingenuity that allowed ecosystems to flourish despite constant change. The oceans that surrounded Pangia were vast highways of life. Currents carried plankton, fish, and larger predators across thousands of miles. Migratory species linked different regions, distributing energy and nutrients across the globe. Deep trenches, underwater mountains, and continental shelves created habitats of extraordinary diversity, each with unique conditions, species, and interactions. Surface waters teemed with life, while the depths hid creatures adapted to darkness, pressure, and scarcity. The interplay of these zones maintained the balance of global marine ecosystems. Life along the edges of Pangia and in the surrounding oceans was a testament to adaptation and diversity. From the intertidal pools to the shallow reefs, from river mouths to the open ocean, every niche was filled with organisms adapted to their conditions. species interacted in complex webs of predation, competition, and cooperation, while environmental forces shaped habitats and created opportunities for evolution. The story of these ecosystems is a story of motion, energy, and life responding to the ever-changing Earth, an ancient world of remarkable vitality and intricacy. These coastal and marine ecosystems were also places of innovation and evolution. Species experimented with forms, feeding strategies, defensive mechanisms, and reproductive strategies. Shelled creatures developed thicker shells, spiny projections, and ways to close off their bodies. Fish and marine reptiles evolved faster swimming, more efficient hunting methods, and complex social behaviors. Plants and algae adapted to light, water flow, and herbivory pressures, developing tall fronds, anchoring structures, and reproductive adaptations. Every organism participated in the unfolding experiment of life, contributing to the rich tapestry of Pangia's edges and oceans. Nutrient cycles drove these ecosystems. Decomposers broke down organic material, returning vital elements to the sediment and water. Filter feeders cleaned the water, removing suspended particles. Predators controlled the population of prey species, preventing overgrazing or collapse. Plants and algae absorbed sunlight and nutrients, supporting herbivores and omnivores, which in turn fed larger predators. The interdependence of all species, from the smallest plankton to the largest marine reptiles, maintained balance and allowed life to persist through both calm periods and environmental upheavals. Even as conditions changed, with storms, tides, volcanic activity, and sea level fluctuations, life continued to adapt. Species migrated, evolved, or went extinct, leaving fossils that now provide a window into this ancient world. Every interaction, from the microscopic grazing of plankton to the hunting of large predators, was part of a living network that connected continents, coasts, and oceans. Pangia's marine and coastal ecosystems were alive in every sense, a dynamic, evolving system of incredible complexity and beauty. These environments were not only homes for animals and plants, but also stages for evolutionary experimentation. Shallow reefs encouraged innovations in defense, mobility, and reproduction. Estuaries and deltas nurtured young animals, allowing them to develop safely before venturing into open waters. Deeper waters selected for adaptations to darkness, pressure, and scarce food. Currents, tides, and seasonal changes forced movement and interaction, maintaining diversity and preventing stagnation. Life in these zones was endlessly creative, continuously reshaping itself in response to the forces of nature. From the smallest intertidal creatures clinging to rocks to the massive reptiles swimming in the open ocean, every organism contributed to the story of life along the edges of Pangia and within its surrounding seas. The seas and coasts were connected, dynamic, and endlessly changing. Currents carried life and nutrients across vast distances, tides reshaped habitats daily, and storms and volcanic activity could alter the landscape in hours or centuries. Life responded with resilience and ingenuity, adapting to challenges, exploiting opportunities, and filling every ecological niche with energy, movement, and purpose. The fossil record that survives from this time tells us much about the richness and diversity of these coastal and marine ecosystems. Fossilized reefs reveal the structure of ancient communities, showing how organisms interacted and built their habitats. Sedimentary layers in estuaries and shallow seas capture the movement of rivers, tides, and currents, along with the organisms that lived there. Deep-sea fossils preserve evidence of rare and specialized species that thrived far from the sunlight, hinting at the complexity and connectivity of ancient oceans. Through these remains, we can see how life adapted to changing conditions, moved across the continents and seas, and formed networks that connected the entire globe.